The fluorescent lights in Dr. Keller's office hummed with the same indifferent drone they'd carried for 30 years, casting sterile white across examination tables that had witnessed 1,000 private catastrophes. Marcus Sullivan sat motionless on the paper-covered bench, his calloused hands resting on denim-clad knees, fingers laced together in a posture that might have looked like prayer, if not for the absolute stillness in his eyes. The doctor's voice filtered through the air like static from a radio station, losing signal words arranging themselves into a sentence Marcus had heard before, in different contexts, different wars. Stage 2 prostate cancer. The syllables landed without impact, absorbed into the scarred tissue of a mind that had cataloged worse news in darker places. Keller kept talking, survival rates, treatment options, the importance of immediate intervention. But Marcus tracked the man's mouth movements more than the meaning, watching how his lips compressed. When delivering statistics, how his eyebrows lifted with manufactured optimism. 58 years of living had taught Marcus to read faces better than words. And Keller's face said what his clinical tone tried to obscure. This was serious, and delay meant consequences. Afghanistan felt closer in that moment than the Montana winter pressing against the window glass. Marcus could smell copper and dust, feel the weight of Corporal Davies against his chest, the kids' blood soaking through both their uniforms while helicopters beat the air overhead. Davies had whispered the same question they all asked when the end arrived ahead of schedule. "Am I going to make it, Sarge?" Marcus had lied, then smooth and automatic, because that's what you did. You lied about death until it stopped being a lie, until the kids' eyes went somewhere else, and the weight in your arms became just weight. Keller slid a packet of papers across his desk, glossy brochures featuring diverse models pretending to be cancer survivors, their smiles too bright, their skin too clear. "We need to schedule you for a consultation with oncology. Dr. Chen is excellent, and if we move quickly, I'll think about it." The words came out flat, a door closing. Keller's professional mask cracked just enough to show frustration underneath the impatience of a man who delivered this speech too many times to too many stubborn patients. "Mr. Sullivan, I understand this is difficult to process, but waiting isn't an option we have here. The staging indicates, I said I'll think about it." Marcus stood the motion, ending the conversation through sheer physical certainty. He'd learned that trick in the Corps, how to stand in a way that made continued talking feel like trespassing. Keller opened his mouth, closed it, then pushed the brochures forward with one finger, like he was sliding evidence across to a reluctant witness. "Take these at least, read them, and please call me within the week." Marcus collected the papers, without looking at them, folded them once, and shoved them into the inner pocket of his leather jacket. The weight of them settled against his chest like a stone in still water, creating ripples he refused to acknowledge. He moved toward the door, hand on the knob, when Keller's voice reached after him with an edge that cut through professional distance. "I've treated a lot of veterans over the years. The ones who made it weren't always the ones with the best prognosis. They were the ones who fought back." Marcus paused, not turning, his reflection barely visible in the office door's frosted glass. "I've been fighting my whole life, Doc. Maybe I'm just tired." The hallway outside swallowed him into its beige normalcy, patients shuffling between rooms, nurses moving with practiced efficiency, the whole choreography of illness and treatment playing out like it did every day in every clinic across America. Marcus walked past it all, his boots striking linoleum with measured rhythm, not hurrying, not hesitating. The veteran in him despised panic, despised the kind of reaction that broadcasts vulnerability. You took your hit, you assessed the damage, you kept moving. The parking lot stretched gray under February sky snow, piled in dirty ridges along the edges where plows had pushed it weeks ago. His Harley-Davidson waited in the far corner, chrome dull in the weak afternoon light, a machine that had carried him across 6 states in 20 years of trying to outrun things that had no physical form. He'd bought it the same month his divorce finalized, trading the stability of a mortgage and marriage for wind and distance, and the specific loneliness that came from being able to go anywhere but having nowhere to go. He straddled the bike, felt the familiar geometry settle around him, the reach to the handlebars, the weight distribution, the way the engine vibrated up through the frame before he even keyed the ignition. For a moment, he just sat there watching his breath condense in the cold air, watching it disappear. The engine caught with a roar that scattered his thoughts, and he let the sound fill the space where thinking happened, let the vibration travel up his spine and into his skull, until there was nothing but the mechanical certainty of combustion and motion. He pulled out of the lot without looking back, without scheduling the follow-up, without doing any of the things Keller's disappointed face had silently demanded. The road home took him through Lodge's industrial district, past shuttered factories that used to make furniture before the mills closed and the jobs vanished, and the town started its slow contraction into something smaller and meaner. Marcus had watched it happen over decades, the gradual erosion of the place he'd grown up in, the way prosperity left, like water through cupped hands, until only the people too stubborn or too broke to leave remained. His cabin sat 15 miles outside the town proper, up a dirt road that most GPS systems didn't acknowledge, surrounded by pine forest, that provided the kind of privacy that could be either peaceful or isolating, depending on the day. He almost missed the turnoff to the clubhouse, his mind drifting in a way that would have gotten him killed in Fallujah, the kind of mental absence that turned routine patrols into casualty reports. But his body knew the route, even when his attention wandered, and the bike carried him down the access road before conscious decision caught up to muscle memory. The Hells Angels Lodge chapter clubhouse materialized through the trees, a low-slung building of cinder block and corrugated metal that had started life as a storage facility before the club bought it 15 years ago and transformed it into something that functioned as bar garage, meeting hall, and fortress, depending on need. 6 bikes lined the gravel lot, their owners presumably inside, dealing with whatever business required midweek assembly. Marcus cut the engine, letting silence rush back in, bringing with it the ambient sounds of wind through branches and the distant bark of someone's dog carrying across empty space. He should go home, should sit alone with Keller's diagnosis and figure out what came next. Instead, he walked toward the clubhouse door, drawn by the gravity of the only family he had left, the only people who looked at him and saw something besides disappointment or damage. The interior hit him with warmth and noise, pool balls, cracking Merle Haggard bleeding from speakers mounted in corners, the smell of motor oil and spilled beer, and the unmistakable musk of men who spent their days working with their hands. Preacher looked up from behind the bar, his weathered face creasing into something that might have been a smile, if you were generous with your definitions. Reaper, didn't expect you till tonight. Marcus moved to the bar, slid onto a stool that knew the shape of him from 1,000 previous visits. Finished early, Preacher poured whiskey without being asked, 2 fingers of bourbon in a glass that had probably started its life in some other establishment before finding its way here through the mysterious migration patterns of bar equipment. Marcus wrapped his hand around it but didn't drink, just felt the slight warmth through the glass, watched the amber liquid catch light. Irons in back with Tommy, kid's getting his final patch approval tonight if the vote goes through. That pulled Marcus's attention up from the glass, sharpened his focus back to the present moment. Tommy Chen, 23 years old and hungry in the way only the truly lost could be hungry, had been prospecting for the club for 6 months. The kid shadowed Marcus like a puppy, showing up at his cabin with tools. When Marcus mentioned fixing his deck, volunteering for every shit job the members threw at prospects, burning with the need to belong to something bigger than his own small damaged history. He ready? Preacher shrugged, started wiping down the bar with a rag that redistributed more than it cleaned. He's eager. Whether that's the same as ready, you tell me. Marcus thought about Tommy's face the first time he'd shown up at the clubhouse 6 months ago. Half Chinese, half white, wearing bruises from whatever altercation had sent him looking for protection or purpose or both. The kid had Naomi Chen's eyes, the same dark determination Marcus remembered from 30 years ago when Naomi had run the corner store and given credit to families who couldn't pay cash. She died of an overdose 4 years back, alone in the apartment above the store, and Tommy had spent the time since drifting through the kind of life that either killed you or remade you. No middle ground available. Where'd you go? The question came from his left, and Marcus turned to find Blade standing closer than he'd realized, the man's presence always preceded by the unmistakable stillness that came from growing up hunting in these mountains. Jake Morrison Blade, to anyone who mattered, had eyes like granite and the kind of patience that made him dangerous in ways most people never recognized until too late. Doctor's appointment. Blade processed that with a slight narrowing of his gaze, reading the space between words the way Tracker read sign. Everything all right? Fine. The lie sat between them for a beat, and Blade's expression said he heard it as clearly as if Marcus had announced the truth, But the man just nodded and moved on, respecting the boundaries that kept men from pushing too hard too fast. That was the thing about the club. Everyone carried damage, and everyone understood that damage came with invisible fences you didn't cross without invitation. The back door opened, and Iron emerged Raymond Hayes, moving with the careful economy of a man who'd spent 62 years learning exactly how much energy each action required and refusing to waste a single erg beyond necessity. Behind him came Tommy, the kid's face flushed with something that looked like hope and terror mixed in equal measure. Iron's eyes found Marcus, immediately the kind of eye contact that conveyed entire conversations without sound. The club president crossed the room, his boots striking concrete with the deliberate rhythm of measured authority. And when he reached the bar, he gestured for Preacher to pour another glass. Reaper, good, saves me a call. Marcus took the whiskey, then let the burn travel down his throat and spread warmth through his chest, a brief pharmacological respite from the persistent low-grade dread that had been his companion since Keller's office. Tommy's coming up for vote tonight. Could use your voice in the room. It wasn't really a request, more an acknowledgement of weight Marcus carried, even without an official title beyond road captain. Iron ran the chapter with the kind of fairness that earned loyalty rather than demanded it, but he also understood politics, understood that some voices carried further than others when difficult decisions needed making. The kid's solid. Hammer doesn't think so. That was the complication, the snake in the garden. Derek Stone Hammer served as vice president and represented the hardline faction that believed the club's survival depended on absolute adherence to codes written decades ago by men who'd never imagined a world this complicated. Hammer saw threats everywhere, saw compromise as weakness, and viewed every new prospect through a lens so suspicious it was practically paranoid. Hammer never thinks anyone's solid. Iron's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more an acknowledgement of truth too obvious to deny. He drank his whiskey in one smooth motion, set the glass down with careful precision, then leaned in close enough that his voice wouldn't carry beyond Marcus's hearing. Black Venom's moving back into the territory. Had confirmation this morning from our friends in Billings. Vipers have been seen around town. The name hit Marcus like voltage through still water, every nerve suddenly alert, 15 years of distance collapsing into immediate present. Vincent Castellano, called Viper for reasons that became apparent the first time you saw him fight, had sworn revenge after Marcus killed his brother, in what any reasonable person would call self-defense, but what Viper's grief had rewritten into murder. The fact that Cobra had been beating a woman half to death when Marcus intervened, that the fight had been forced, that Marcus had spent 2 months proving self-defense to a jury, none of that mattered to a man whose entire identity had been built around fraternal loyalty. How sure are we? Sure enough, Black Venom's been quiet since Viper got out of prison 6 months ago, but apparently quiet meant regrouping. They're setting up distribution networks, feeling out territory boundaries, and from what I hear, Viper's been asking about you. Marcus felt old instincts activate, the combat alertness that never fully left, just submerged under civilian life like a submarine running dark. He'd killed men in Iraq, killed them close enough to see their eyes, and he'd killed Cobra in a bar parking lot while witnesses screamed and sirens approached. None of those deaths haunted him the way his sisters did, the one death he couldn't prevent, couldn't fight, could only witness helplessly. But Cobra's death had consequences that kept unfolding, and apparently those consequences were coming home. He makes a move on the club, we handle it. Iron's expression shifted, something heavy moving behind his eyes. It's not the club I'm worried about. He wants you, Marcus. Personal. And personal means he's not going to follow any rules we recognize. Before Marcus could respond, Tommy appeared at his elbow, vibrating with nervous energy, hands shoved in pockets to hide their trembling. The kid looked at Marcus like a drowning man, looks at a life preserver, desperate and grateful and terrified all at once. Reaper, could I talk to you just for a minute? Marcus glanced at Iron, received a small nod of permission, then followed Tommy toward the back corner, where the noise from the bar diminished to manageable levels. The kid paced 3 steps one way, 3 steps back, burning through adrenaline that had nowhere productive to go. I know I'm ready. I know I am. I've done everything they asked, everything. But Hammer's job is to be skeptical. Don't take it personal. Tommy stopped pacing, turned to face Marcus directly, and for a moment the kid's mask slipped enough to show the terrified boy underneath the bravado. What if I'm not good enough? What if they vote no and I'm just alone again? The raw need in that question hit Marcus harder than it should have, bypassing the armor he had built against other people's pain. He recognized the desperation, had seen it before in young Marines who joined up fleeing broken homes and emptier futures, who needed the Corps to tell them who they were because they had no idea otherwise. You're good enough, Tommy. You've shown heart, you've shown loyalty, and you've put in the work. That's what matters. But if Hammer doesn't get sole vote, this is a democracy such as it is. You let the process work. Tommy searched Marcus's face like he was trying to read coordinates off a map, looking for certainty in a situation that offered none. Then something shifted in his expression, a different kind of nervousness bleeding through. There's something else. Something I heard. Marcus waited, letting silence do the work. I was at the Rusty Nail last night, just having a beer, keeping my head down. And there were these guys, not from around here, leather cuts with a snake design. Black Venom, I think. And one of them, the one with the scar down his face, he was asking the bartender about you, about where you lived, where you hung out when you'd be alone. Cold clarity moved through Marcus's nervous system, sharpening everything, bringing the world into high-definition focus. Viper wasn't just back in town, he was actively hunting. What did the bartender say? Nothing far as I could tell. Mike knows better than to talk. But these guys, they weren't subtle. They wanted people to know they were asking. That tracked with what Marcus knew about Viper's psychology. The man had always been theatrical, had always needed his actions to carry symbolic weight. If he wanted revenge, he wouldn't just ambush Marcus some random night. He'd want witnesses, would want the act to mean something in the currency of reputation and fear. You did right telling me. And Tommy, Marcus waited until the kid met his eyes. You don't go looking into this. Understand Black Venom's dangerous in ways you're not ready to handle. Tommy bristled at that pride flaring, but Marcus cut through it with the flat authority of someone who'd seen too many young men die trying to prove themselves. I mean it. You stay away from them, you stay away from this situation. That's not advice, that's an order. The word hung between them, and after a moment, Tommy nodded, some of the recklessness draining from his posture. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, felt the kid's bones through his shirt, all wire and nerve, with not enough weight to back up his courage. Go get ready for your vote. And Tommy, welcome home. The kid's face transformed fear, giving way to something that looked almost like woe, and he practically bounced away back toward the main room where the other members were gathering in. Marcus watched him go, feeling the weight that came from being someone else's hope, being the fixed point around which lost people tried to orient themselves. He needed air, needed space, needed the cold clarity of winter to cut through the accumulated weight of the day. He pushed out the side door into the service alley where members came to smoke or think or escape the confined pressure of the clubhouse. The February cold hit him like a slap, sharp and clarifying, and he drew it deep into his lungs, holding it until the burn became something almost meditative. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Lisa's name on the screen, his daughter calling from Seattle, where she'd built a life that carefully excluded him from all but the most superficial involvement. He stared at the notification thumb hovering over the answer button, but the distance between them felt too vast to cross in the 30 seconds she'd wait before voicemail claimed the call. What would he say? That he had cancer, that Black Venom was hunting him, that he'd spent 20 years trying to be someone she could respect and had failed at every measurement that mattered. The call went to voicemail. He listened to his own recorded voice. This is Marcus. Leave a message, delivered in the flat tone of a man who didn't expect anyone to call. Then Lisa's voice, careful and distant. Hey, Dad, just checking in. Give me a call when you can. Love you. The last two words felt automatic ritual rather than emotion, but he held on to them anyway because they were all he had. He almost called back, almost let impulse override judgment, but then the side door opened and Shane stepped out. Tommy Rodriguez, moving with the jittery energy of someone who'd been drinking too much coffee and not sleeping enough. Meeting starting in 5. Iron wants everyone inside. Marcus pocketed his phone, Lisa's message joining the brochures from Keller in the catalog of things he'd deal with later or never. He followed Shane's back into the warmth, back into the noise, back into the only life he'd managed to build from the wreckage of all his previous attempts. The meeting room sat behind the main bar, accessed through a door marked private that everyone understood meant members only. Wooden benches lined 3 walls facing a central table where Iron and Hammer sat like judges at a trial. 26 members crowded the space, the complete roster of Lodge chapter present, and accounted for because votes required quorum, and quorum meant everyone showed up or had better be dead. Marcus took his usual spot along the left wall between Preacher and a younger member called Axel, whose real name nobody remembered or cared about. Tommy stood in the center of the room alone, an exposed being measured by 24 pairs of eyes that had seen prospects come and go, had voted men in and voted men out, had exercised the power that came from collective judgment. Iron called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of a gavel that had probably come from some county courthouse at some point in history. The formality of it had always struck Marcus as slightly absurd. Grown men playing at parliamentary procedure in a cinder block room that smelled like motor oil and stale beer. But he understood the purpose. Ritual created structure, and structure kept chaos at bay. We're here to vote on Thomas Chen's full membership. He's completed his 6-month prospect period. He's been vouched for. Before we vote, anyone got something to say. Hammer stood immediately, his bulk filling space in a way that felt aggressive even when he was technically just standing. Derek Stone had worked construction for 30 years, and it showed in his shoulders, his hands, the solid reality of a man built from concrete and rebar. I got concerns. The room settled into attentive quiet, everyone understanding that Hammer's concerns weren't optional listening. Tommy's young, he's eager, I'll give him that, but eager gets people killed. Eager makes mistakes, and we're at a point where mistakes could cost us everything. He let that sit, scanning faces, making sure the weight of his words landed. Marcus could feel the calculation happening in real time, members weighing their loyalty to leadership against the argument Hammer was making. Black Venom's moving back into territory, we all know it. There's going to be conflict, going to be situations that require men who've been tested. Tommy hasn't been tested. He's a kid playing dress up, and I don't want to vote him in just because he's been Reaper's little shadow for 6 months. The dig landed as intended, heads turning toward Marcus, measuring his reaction. Tommy's face flushed red, humiliation and anger warring for dominance. Iron's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught the slight tension in his jaw, the tell that said the president was displeased but controlling it. Marcus stood not because Hammer's attack required response, but because Tommy deserved better than silence in the face of public dismissal. The room's attention shifted, everyone understanding that whatever came next would carry weight. Tommy's been solid. I've watched him work, watched him handle situations that would have made most prospects quit. He shows up, he follows orders, and he's got loyalty. That's what we asked for. Hammer turned to face him directly, establishing the confrontation visually for everyone present. Loyalty to who, though? To the club or to you? The question hung there, dangerous, implying the kind of divided allegiance that could tear a chapter apart. Marcus held Hammer's stare, not backing down, not escalating, just standing in the space of absolute certainty. To both, because they're the same thing. I'm the club as much as you are Derek. And when I vouch for someone, I'm putting my reputation on it. Your reputation. Hammer made it sound like those 2 words contained entire arguments, and maybe they did. Marcus's relationship with the club had always been complicated. He carried weight from years of service, from dangerous situations handled and conflicts resolved, but he also carried the stigma of being divorced, of being childless, for all intents of living alone in a cabin, instead of maintaining the kind of nuclear family structure that proves stability. Yeah, my reputation, which includes 15 years of service combat experience and a track record of making good calls under pressure. So when I say Tommy's ready, you can bank it. The room measured the standoff, old tensions surfacing like sediment stirred from the bottom of a still pond. Then Preacher spoke up, his voice carrying the authority of age and long memory. I've known Marcus since he prospected back when most of you were still in high school. He's never steered us wrong. If he says the kid's solid, that's good enough for me. Other voices joined in the room, fracturing into factions, some supporting Marcus, others agreeing with Hammer's caution. Everyone suddenly invested in a decision that 2 minutes ago had seemed routine. Iron let it play out for exactly long enough to hear the temperature of the room, then brought the gavel down hard enough to crack wood. Enough, we vote, all in favor of accepting Thomas Chen to full membership. Hands rose, Marcus's first, then Preacher's, then others, in a cascade that eventually reached 20 hands out of 26 present. Not unanimous, but clear majority, And in the club's democracy, that's what mattered. Tommy's face transformed, trying to maintain composure and failing emotion breaking through in a way that was almost painful to witness. Motion carries. Tommy, you're in. Welcome, brother. The room erupted in noise, members crowding forward to shake Tommy's hand, to clap him on the back, to initiate him into the kind of chosen family that only groups like this could provide. Marcus watched from the periphery, feeling the weight of responsibility settle across his shoulders like a vest he'd just agreed to wear. Iron caught his eye across the room, gestured toward the door with a subtle tilt of his head. Marcus extracted himself from the crowd, followed the president out into the service alley where cold air provided immediate privacy. Iron pulled a cigarette from his shirt pocket, lit it with hands that trembled just enough to be noticeable if you were looking for it. You made an enemy in there. Hammer's always been half an enemy. Today just made it official. Iron drew smoke, deep held it, released it in a gray stream that dissipated into February darkness. He's not wrong about black venom. Things are going to get complicated, and complicated requires experienced men. Tommy'll rise to it. Maybe, or maybe you just created a situation where the kid feels obligated to prove himself doing something stupid and dangerous. Iron turned to look at Marcus directly, the cigarette glowing between them like a small orange eye. I need you clear-headed, Reaper. Need you focused. Can't have you distracted by whatever went wrong at that doctor's appointment today. The observation landed with the precision of a man who'd spent 4 decades reading people's tells. Marcus considered lying, considered maintaining the fiction of fine, but Iron deserved better than that. Cancer, prostate, stage 2. Iron's expression barely changed, just a slight tightening around the eyes, a subtle shift in the set of his mouth. He took another drag, ashed the cigarette against the building's brick wall, then looked out at the tree line like he could see through the darkness into something beyond. Well, shit. Yeah. You starting treatment? Haven't decided. Iron nodded slowly, processing that information through whatever calculus presidents use to balance individual members' autonomy against the chapter's collective needs. Want my advice? Not particularly. Tough. Get the treatment. Fight it. We need you around, and not just for club business. Iron's voice carried an edge of something that might have been affection if you squinted. You're one of the good ones, Marcus. Be a waste to lose you to pride. They stood in silence for a while, 2 men who had known each other long enough that words became optional presence sufficient. Then Iron finished his cigarette, ground it out under his boot heel with careful thoroughness, and headed toward the door. Meeting's done, but stick around. Want to talk about security protocols with black venom active? Marcus followed him back inside, back into warmth and noise, in the chaos of 26 men celebrating a new member's acceptance. Tommy worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, his face showing the kind of pure joy that came from finally belonging somewhere. When he spotted Marcus, he broke away from the crowd and crossed the room in 5 quick strides. Thank you, seriously thank you. I know you went to bat for me in there. You earned it, Tommy. Just remember, being a full member means responsibility. Means showing up when it's hard, not just when it's easy. I know, I will, I promise. The kid's earnestness was almost painful, this desperate need to prove worthy, written across every line of his body. Marcus recognized it, had felt it himself at 23, when the Marines had been the first organization to tell him he had value, that he could be more than the sum of his failures. He was about to offer some further wisdom when his phone buzzed again. Not Lisa this time, but an unknown number with a local area code. He stepped away from the celebration, answered with his usual curt greeting. Yeah. Marcus Sullivan. The voice was female, professional, carrying the neutral quality of someone trained to deliver information without emotional inflection. This is Sergeant Rachel Vance, Lodge Police Department. We met a few years back, though you might not remember. He remembered. Rachel Vance had been the officer who'd handled his last arrest. Minor charges, a bar fight that got out of hand. Charges eventually dropped, but the encounter remembered. She'd been fair, efficient, neither friendly nor hostile, just doing her job with the competence of someone who'd been doing it long enough to have seen everything. I remember. What can I do for you, Sergeant? I need to ask you some questions about an incident earlier today. Can you come down to the station? Every instinct screamed. Trap screamed. Setup screamed that cops calling Hell's Angels out of the blue never led anywhere good. But Rachel Vance's voice didn't carry the edge of aggression, carried instead a quality that sounded almost like concern. What kind of incident? I'd rather discuss it in person. It's complicated, and it might concern your safety. That last phrase hooked him, not because he was worried about his own safety, but because in his experience, cops didn't warn civilians about danger unless something serious had happened. Viper's name flashed through his mind. Black Venom's returned the pattern of inquiry Tommy had reported. When, as soon as possible, I'm at the station now, can be for another hour. Marcus checked his watch, 8:30, meaning he could make it downtown in 15 minutes if he left immediately. Iron was still talking security protocols with Hammer and a few senior members. Tommy was drowning in attention, and nobody would miss him for an hour. I'll be there in 20. He ended the call, grabbed his jacket from where he'd left it draped over a bar stool, and headed for the door. Preacher called after him, "You leaving already?" But Marcus just waved without turning, not wanting to explain, not wanting to open the conversation that would require explanation. The ride downtown cut through darkness, broken only by streetlights and the occasional lit window of houses where normal people lived. Normal lives, families gathered around dinner tables or television screens, the mundane comfort of domesticity that Marcus had tried and failed to build. He'd married Julie when he was 30, convinced that settling down was what you did after military service, after proving yourself, after accumulating enough scars to be interesting, but not so many you were damaged. They'd lasted 8 years before she'd looked at him one morning across the kitchen table and said with absolute clarity, "You're not here. Even when you're here, you're somewhere else. And I can't keep having a marriage with a ghost." She'd been right, of course. He'd been in Iraq every night in his dreams, been at his sister's accident site, every time he closed his eyes, been everywhere except present in the life he was supposedly living. Lisa had been 6 when the divorce finalized, old enough to understand that something had broken, but young enough to blame herself, to internalize her parents' failure as evidence of her own inadequacy. By the time she was 20, she'd moved to Seattle and built a life that involved him only in the most peripheral way, obligatory calls on holidays, brief visits that felt more like inspections than reunions, a relationship maintained out of duty rather than desire. The police station loomed out of the darkness like a brick monument to institutional authority, its parking lot mostly empty at this hour, the building's windows glowing with the fluorescent certainty of night shift work. Marcus parked his bike in a visitor space, checked his phone one more time. Lisa hadn't called back, hadn't texted, then headed toward the entrance with the wariness that came from knowing cops and bikers existed in a state of permanent mutual suspicion. The desk sergeant looked up from his computer recognition, flickering across his face. Marcus had been through this lobby enough times over the years that his face was probably in a database somewhere marked with warnings and notes about affiliation. "Here to see Sergeant Vance." The desk sergeant picked up a phone, spoke quietly, then gestured toward the hallway. "She'll meet you in interview room 3, down the hall, 3rd door on your right." Marcus followed the directions through corridors that smelled like floor wax and bad coffee, past bulletin boards covered with wanted posters and community outreach flyers, the whole architecture of law enforcement on display. Interview room 3 was exactly what he expected. Small gray dominated by a metal table and uncomfortable chairs, the institutional aesthetic of a space designed to extract truth through discomfort. He sat, waited, used the time to center himself the way he'd learned in the Corps, breathing deep and slow, keeping his heart rate steady, maintaining the emotional neutrality that kept you operational when everything was going wrong. The door opened and Rachel Vance walked in, and he saw immediately that something was wrong. She moved carefully like someone managing pain, and there was a bandage visible at the collar of her shirt, the edge of medical tape showing against her neck. Her face looked drawn, older than he remembered from their last encounter, with shadows under her eyes that spoke to sleepless nights and stress that went beyond the normal demands of police work. She sat across from him, arranged a folder on the table, then met his eyes with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you for coming. You said it was about my safety." "It is, and mine." She paused, seemed to be choosing words carefully, then opened the folder to reveal photographs, surveillance images, grainy and dark, showing figures Marcus recognized. Black Venom Motorcycle Club has been operating in the area for approximately 3 months. We've been tracking them, building a case on drug distribution and weapons trafficking. 2 days ago, my cover was blown. Someone inside the department leaked information about my investigation. She pulled another photograph from the folder, this one showing Marcus's cabin, showing his bike parked outside, showing the approach from the road that meant someone had been watching his property. They know you killed Viper's brother. They've been asking about you, about your routines, about when you're vulnerable. And based on chatter we've intercepted, they're planning something. We don't know what, we don't know when, but you're a target. Marcus studied the photograph of his cabin, seeing it through the lens of threat assessment, recognizing all the vulnerabilities he'd ignored in favor of isolation and privacy. Why tell me this? Why not just let nature take its course, one less Hell's Angel for you to worry about? Rachel's expression hardened, something fierce moving behind her professionalism. Because I'm a cop, not an executioner. And because she hesitated, then seemed to decide on honesty. Because we served together. Iraq, 2003. Forward Operating Base Falcon. You were with 2nd Battalion 7th Marines. I was Army MP attached to your unit for 6 weeks during the Fallujah operation. The information hit him like a flare going off in darkness, illuminating memory he'd filed away under the category of faces he'd never see again. Rachel Vance, younger than Army uniform, the woman who'd pulled security during their patrols, who'd been there the day the IED took out their convoy, who'd helped carry wounded Marines to the medevac while insurgent fire tore up the street around them. Jesus, I didn't recognize you. No reason you would. Different life, different uniform, 15 years gone. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. But I remember you, Sullivan. I remember you carrying Corporal Davies 3 blocks under fire. I remember you holding that kid together literally and figuratively while we waited for extraction. So when I found out Black Venom was hunting you, I thought you deserved a warning from someone who knows what you're capable of when the shit hits the fan. Marcus sat back, processing this collision of past and present, military and civilian, the way history kept circling back, no matter how far you rode trying to escape it. I appreciate the warning, but I can handle myself. I'm sure you can, but Viper's not fighting fair. He's got resources, he's got manpower, and he's got nothing to lose. Be careful. She stood, started to gather her folder, then paused. One more thing. I'm meeting an informant tomorrow night. Former Black Venom member who's agreed to testify if something happens to me if I don't make it. She pulled a business card from her pocket, wrote a number on the back. That's my personal cell. I've programmed your number into my phone. If there's trouble, I'll try to call. And if you don't hear from me by midnight tomorrow, assume the worst. The request hung between them, heavy with implication. She was asking him to be her backup, her fail-safe, trusting a Hell's Angel with information that could get her killed if it reached the wrong ears. Marcus took the card, slipped it into his wallet alongside Lisa's last photo and his military ID that he'd carried for 15 years after discharge. I'll be listening. Rachel nodded once, then moved toward the door with that same careful deliberation that spoke to injury not fully healed. Marcus stood too, feeling the weight of obligation that came from shared history, from battles fought together, even if neither of them had known at the time how those battles would matter. Vance, Rachel. He waited until she turned back to face him. What happened to you? Those bandages aren't from a paper cut. Her expression shuddered, professional mask sliding back into place. Nothing you need to worry about. Take care of yourself, Sullivan. She left the door closing with a mechanical finality, leaving Marcus alone in the gray room with more questions than answers, and the unease that came from having multiple threats converging from multiple directions. He walked back through the station, past the desk sergeant, out into cold air that felt clean after the recycled atmosphere of institutional spaces. His phone showed missed messages. Iron asking where he'd gone. Tommy sending a celebratory selfie with other members. Lisa's earlier voicemail still waiting for response. He ignored all of it, straddled his bike, let the engine's roar fill the space where thoughts tried to form. The ride home took him through darkness that felt thicker now, more oppressive, every shadow potentially containing a threat he couldn't see but could sense like pressure against his skin. The turnoff to his property appeared like a wound in the tree-lined dirt road disappearing into forest that could hide anything. He slowed, scanned the darkness with combat-trained attention, looking for vehicles that didn't belong, for movement that wasn't when, for any indication that Rachel Vance's warning had come too late. Nothing obvious presented itself, but that meant less than people thought. Good hunters knew how to wait, knew how to blend, knew that patience was often more deadly than speed. He parked the bike in its usual spot, but left the kickstand down ready for quick departure if needed. The cabin sat dark and silent, exactly as he'd left it, but the hair on the back of his neck prickled with the persistent sense of being watched. He pulled his 45 from the concealed holster at his back, illegal to carry concealed without permit, but he'd stopped caring about legal versus survival years ago, and approached the door with the kind of careful movement that would be invisible to anyone not trained to notice. The door opened smoothly. No signs of forced entry. Interior darkness, broken only by the green glow of his microwave clock showing 9:47. He cleared each room systematically, checking closets and corners, and anywhere a man could hide, finding nothing but the accumulated loneliness of a life lived mostly in solitude. Only when he was certain of his immediate security did he holster the weapon, turn on lights, allow himself to exhale tension that had been building since Rachel Vance's warning. The cabin's interior reflected his personality in ways he didn't like: minimal furniture, military precision, in arrangement, nothing personal on display beyond a single photograph of his sister Sarah that he kept on the mantel. 26 years old in the picture, laughing at something outside the frame, alive in ways that made her death feel like cosmic mistake rather than random tragedy. She'd been driving home from work, late shift at the diner, when a drunk driver crossed the center line and turned her Honda into crushed metal. Marcus had been 32, stationed at Camp Pendleton, received the call from his mother at 3 a.m. By the time he'd gotten leave and made it home, Sarah had been dead for 18 hours, and the drunk driver had walked away with minor injuries and eventually a suspended sentence that felt like insult added to catastrophe. He retrieved the brochures from Keller from his jacket pocket, spread them on the kitchen table alongside Lisa's missed call notification. Both demanded decisions he wasn't ready to make, demanded engagement with futures he wasn't sure he wanted to build. The cancer felt abstract, still a concept rather than reality, something happening to a body he inhabited but didn't identify with. The military had taught him to treat his physical form as equipment, maintain it, push it, repair it when damaged, but never confuse the vehicle with the driver. His laptop sat on the table where he'd left it that morning, screen dark, waiting. He opened it, navigated to the email he'd been avoiding for 3 weeks, the message from his oncologist marked urgent. Keller had sent details before the appointment, medical records and test results with language that translated roughly to this: "Is serious, we need to act now. Delay is dangerous." He read through the information with the same detachment he'd read casualty reports in Iraq, processing data without letting it become personal. Stage 2 meant the cancer was growing, but not yet metastasized. Treatment would involve surgery, possibly radiation, definitely months of recovery and uncertainty. Success rates looked good if caught early, less good if you waited, terrible if you ignored it completely. A knock at the door pulled him from the screen, hand moving automatically to the 45 before conscious thought caught up. It was past 10 and nobody visited his cabin unannounced. Nobody except Reaper. "It's me, Tommy." He opened the door to find the kid standing in yellow porch light, looking younger than 23. His new Hells Angels patch visible on his vest like a badge of belonging that still felt unreal. "What are you doing here? I saw you leave the clubhouse. Wanted to make sure you were okay. You seemed, I don't know, off." Marcus considered sending him away. Considered maintaining the boundary between mentor and friend, between guidance and actual relationship. But the kid had ridden 15 miles in February darkness because he'd noticed something wrong, and that kind of attention deserved acknowledgement. "Come in, but only for a minute." Tommy entered like he was stepping into sacred space, looking around at the sparse furnishings and military precision with the kind of curiosity that came from trying to understand someone by studying their environment. Marcus gestured toward the couch, moved to the kitchen to grab beers from the fridge that contained mostly beer and condiments. "Nice place." "It's a place." Tommy accepted the beer, drank long, then set it on the coffee table with careful placement that suggested he was nervous about breaking something. "Look, I know I'm probably overstepping, but I wanted to say thanks again for vouching for me, for standing up when Hammer came at me. It meant everything." "You earned your patch, Tommy. I just told the truth." Still, not everyone would have gone to bat like that. The kid paused, seemed to be gathering courage for something. "And I wanted you to know, whatever's going on, whatever you're dealing with, I've got your back. That's what brothers do, right?" The simple sincerity of it hit Marcus harder than it should have, this kid offering loyalty to someone who'd done nothing except not turn him away. He wanted to warn Tommy that loyalty had costs, that standing with Marcus might mean standing against threats Tommy couldn't imagine. But the words died before reaching his mouth because he saw himself reflected in the kid's face, 23 years old, desperate for purpose, willing to die for the first person who'd shown him kindness. Yeah, Tommy, that's what brothers do. They sat in companionable silence for a while, drinking beer, not needing to fill space with a conversation. Then Tommy's phone buzzed, some text message that made him grimace. I should probably head back. Early shift at the garage tomorrow. He stood, hesitated, then turned back. Hey, you ever need anything? I mean, anything you call me? Day or night. I'm serious. I know you are. Thanks, kid. Marcus walked him to the door, watched him climb on his bike, and disappeared down the dirt road, trailing red taillights that faded into forest darkness. Then he returned to the laptop, to Keller's email, to the decision that kept circling back no matter how many times he rode away from it. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, preparing to compose a response that would schedule treatment, would commit to fighting a battle he wasn't sure he wanted to win. But before he could type, his phone vibrated on the table, text message from Rachel's personal number. Meeting informant now, Riverside Cannery. If you don't hear from me by 11 p.m., something went wrong. Marcus checked the time, 10:23, 37 minutes. He stared at the message, at the implicit trust it represented, at the weight of being someone's emergency contact when you barely qualified as acquaintance. He should stay home, should let law enforcement handle law enforcement business, should maintain the boundaries that kept his world and theirs from colliding. But Rachel had trusted him with this information, had given him her number, had essentially deputized him as her backup without official authorization or paperwork. He typed back, copy, standing by. Then he sat at his kitchen table, or 5 within reach phone screen, bright in the cabin's dim light, counting down minutes, while somewhere across town a cop he'd served with 15 years ago was walking into a situation that might get her killed. 10:40 p.m., 20 minutes to deadline, 10:52 p.m., 8 minutes, 10:59 p.m., 1 minute. His phone rang at 11 p.m. exactly, but not a call, a triggered connection like Rachel had activated something on her end. The line was open, but nobody spoke, just ragged breathing and distant sounds. Then shots, unmistakable crack of gunfire. Then Rachel's voice, strained, desperate. Ambush! Riverside! Help! The line went dead. Marcus was moving before conscious decision formed, grabbing his jacket, his weapon, his keys. The bike started on first try, and he was riding before he'd fully processed what he was doing, instinct overriding caution, training taking over. The Riverside Cannery sat in the industrial district, abandoned for a decade, the kind of place that attracted drug deals and homeless camps, and now apparently ambushes designed to kill cops. He killed his headlight 3 blocks out, navigating by moonlight and memory approaching, with the tactical awareness that had kept him alive in Iraq. The cannery loomed against night sky like a monument to industrial decline, broken windows and rusted equipment, creating shadows that could hide anything. He parked 2 blocks away, moved forward on foot, weapon drawn, every sense alert for threats. The alley behind the cannery was where he found her. Rachel Vance slumped against brick wall, police uniform torn badge reflecting moonlight blood, dark and spreading. Her service weapon lay 5 feet away, slide locked back on empty magazine. Shell casings littered the ground like scattered evidence of a fight she'd lost. This had been an ambush, and from the blood trail, she'd crawled here after being hit elsewhere. Marcus knelt beside her, combat first aid training taking over before thought could interfere. Check breathing, shallow but present. Check circulation, pulse weak but steady. Find the wound's gunshot to lower abdomen through and through based on exit wound. Stab wound to left shoulder, deep, probably punctured muscle. Defensive wounds on forearms where she tried to protect herself. Rachel, stay with me. Her eyes opened, the recognition flashing through pain and shock. Her hand found his, gripped with surprising strength for someone losing this much blood. Sullivan. They knew. Someone told them. He tore off his leather vest, wadded it against the abdominal wound, applied pressure that made her gasp. His belt came off, next makeshift tourniquet for the shoulder tight enough to slow bleeding, but not cut circulation completely. All the while, his mind calculated, maybe 20 minutes, since she'd called blood loss severe, but not immediately fatal yet. She had perhaps 10 minutes before shock became irreversible. Can't move you until I stop the bleeding. Hold on. Viper was here, said this is just the beginning. Her voice was fading, eyes losing focus. Said tell you, he's taking everything you care about. Marcus pulled his phone, dialed 911, started giving dispatcher coordinates while maintaining pressure on wounds that kept trying to bleed through his makeshift bandages. Rachel's grip on his hand was weakening, her breathing becoming more shallow, her body starting to shut down from blood loss. Ambulance is 5 minutes out. You're going to make it, Rachel. Just stay with me. My daughter, Maggie, 16. Tell her. You're going to tell her yourself. But her eyes were rolling back, consciousness leaving, and Marcus was alone in an alley with a dying soldier, not a cop, not an enemy, but a fellow veteran who'd saved his life once and who he was now trying to save in return. He kept pressure on the wounds, kept talking to her even though she couldn't hear, kept making promises about survival, until sirens approached and paramedics took over, and he stepped back into shadows covered in her blood, holding his vest that would never be clean again. The ambulance screamed away with Rachel inside, and Marcus stood alone in the alley, surrounded by evidence of violence he hadn't prevented. His phone buzzed Tommy, the kid monitoring his police scanner. Heard call about officer down at Riverside. That you? You okay? Marcus typed back with shaking hands. Not me, but I was first on scene. Heading to hospital now. He returned to his bike, started the engine, followed the ambulance's path towards St. Mary's Hospital, and whatever came next. Behind him, the alley remained empty except for blood and brass and the particular kind of violence that said this was personal, that Viper wasn't just seeking revenge, he was declaring war. And Marcus Sullivan, 58 years old, cancer growing in his body, ghosts haunting his past, was apparently the primary target. The ambulance screamed through Lodge's empty streets, with Marcus following close behind, his Harley's engine, a constant roar that drowned out thought, but couldn't silence the image burned into his vision. Rachel Vance slumped against brick, blood pooling beneath her, her eyes finding his with recognition that transcended their surface antagonism. The paramedics had worked with practiced efficiency, loading her onto a gurney while firing questions. Marcus answered in clipped military cadence: gunshot wound in lower abdomen, stab wound left shoulder, approximately 20 minutes since injury, conscious but fading. They hadn't asked why a Hell's Angel knew combat first aid, and Marcus hadn't offered explanation beyond what kept her breathing. St. Mary's Hospital materialized from darkness like a beacon of institutional mercy, its emergency entrance ablaze with lights that turned night into artificial day. Marcus killed his engine in the loading zone, ignoring the no parking signs, because parking implied future and he was operating purely in present tense in the immediate tactical reality of getting Rachel Vance from dying to alive. He dismounted just as the ambulance doors burst open and paramedics rushed the gurney toward automatic doors that parted with hydraulic certainty. Security descended immediately, two guards materializing from nowhere, their hands hovering near weapons that probably weren't loaded, but communicated threat nonetheless. The larger one, a former cop, judging by his stance, and the way his eyes cataloged Marcus in one sweep, positioned himself between the Hell's Angel and the hospital entrance. Sir, you need to move your motorcycle and wait in the visitor lot. Marcus looked past him toward the doors where Rachel was disappearing into sterile corridors, into the machinery of emergency medicine that would either save her or document her death with forms in triplicate. His vest was gone, left behind as makeshift bandage, leaving him in blood-soaked t-shirt that advertised exactly how this night had unfolded. The guard's hand moved closer to his weapon. Sir, I need you to step back. She's a cop, Sergeant Rachel Vance. Someone needs to notify her family. That information shifted something in the guard's posture, security protocol colliding with the fraternal obligation. He spoke into his radio, rapid exchange. Marcus couldn't fully hear, then another figure appeared. Desharna Mitchell, trauma surgeon, moving with the purposeful velocity of someone whose time measured in lives saved or lost. Mitchell's eyes found Marcus, took in the blood-made calculations visible in her expression. You brought her in, found her, did first aid, called it in. Military training, Marines, Iraq. Mitchell nodded once, a gesture that contained recognition and respect, and the understanding that came from shared exposure to chaos. You probably saved her life. The field dressing bought her enough time. She turned to the security guards. He's with me. Let him through. The guards stepped aside and Marcus followed Mitchell through doors that led into the controlled chaos of emergency medicine nurses moving with synchronized purpose. Doctors calling orders, monitors beeping with the mechanical heartbeat of bodies fighting for continuation. Mitchell led him to a waiting area outside trauma bay. Three gestured toward plastic chairs designed for maximum discomfort. We're taking her to surgery now. Gunshot did damage but missed major organs. The stab wound is concerning. Looks like whoever did it knew anatomy aimed for brachial artery. She's lost a lot of blood. Next few hours will tell us if she makes it. Mitchell paused, seemed to be deciding something. There's going to be police, a lot of police. You might want to consider what you tell them about how you found her. I'll tell them the truth. The truth that puts you in an alley at midnight with a stabbed cop. That truth, Marcus met her gaze without flinching. I didn't hurt her. I helped her. Mitchell studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you. Not sure they will, but I believe you. Navy, by the way. Desert Storm 91, trauma surgeon on the USS Mercy. She offered her hand and Marcus shook it, feeling the solidarity of veterans recognizing each other across different wars, different branches, different decades of service to something larger than themselves. She disappeared back into the trauma bay, leaving Marcus alone with institutional silence, broken only by distant beeping and the low murmur of medical personnel speaking their specialized language. He felt adrenaline start to drain from his system, felt the crash beginning that always followed combat situations, the shaking hands, the rapid heartbeat slowing to normal, the creeping exhaustion that came from running on pure nerve for extended periods. His phone vibrated. Tommy the kid's message, frantic, on my way to hospital. Don't talk to cops without me there. Marcus typed back quickly, stay at clubhouse. Don't come here. That's an order. He didn't want Tommy anywhere near this situation, didn't want the kid's first night as full member contaminated by the violence that was Marcus's burden to carry. The waiting room door opened and Detective James Brennan walked through like a storm given human form, 52 years old, 30 years on the force, every one of those years visible in the lines carved into his face, and the weariness that came from seeing humanity's worst impulses documented in case files. Behind him came Detective Lieutenant Sarah Cross, 47, angular and sharp in ways that suggested she'd had to fight for every inch of respect in a department that still struggled with female authority. Brennan's eyes locked onto Marcus with laser intensity, taking in the blood-soaked shirt, the absence of vest, the visible exhaustion. His hand moved toward his weapon in automatic response before training overrode instinct, and he forced himself to relax marginally. Marcus Sullivan, should have known you'd be in the middle of this. Marcus remained seated, keeping his hands visible, maintaining the careful neutrality that kept volatile situations from exploding. I found her. Called it in. That's all. That's all. Brennan repeated the words like they were foreign language requiring translation. You just happened to find her in an alley behind the Riverside Cannery at 11 p.m. She texted me earlier, said she was meeting an informant, asked me to check in if I didn't hear from her by 11. When she didn't respond, I went looking. Cross pulled out a notepad, started writing with mechanical precision. Rachel texted you specifically. Why would she have your number? We served together, Iraq 2003. She came to the station earlier today, warned me about black venom, gave me her personal number in case of emergency. That information landed like physical impact, both detectives exchanging glances that communicated entire conversations. Brennan moved closer, pulled out a chair, sat with deliberate slowness that suggested he was trying to control rage threatening to surface. Explain. All of it. From the beginning. Marcus walked them through the evening, Rachel's visit to the station, her warning about Viper's vendetta, the text about meeting her informant, his decision to check on her when she didn't respond. He kept his voice flat, factual, leaving out emotion because emotion invited skepticism. Brennan listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing, while Cross took notes that covered 3 pages with dense handwriting. When Marcus finished, silence stretched for 15 seconds that felt like 15 minutes. Then Brennan leaned back, studied Marcus with the expression of a man trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. You're Hell's Angels. She's a cop investigating a rival MC. You want me to believe you two are friendly because of service 15 years ago. I want you to believe I found her dying and I helped her. Whether we're friendly doesn't matter. It matters to me. It matters because Rachel's been investigating black venom for 18 months, getting close to something big, and now someone tries to kill her. You show up covered in her blood claiming you're the hero. That's convenient. The accusation hung there, and Marcus felt old anger stir the fury that came from being judged by people who'd never worn uniform, who'd never held dying friends, who operated from the luxury of assuming guilt until overwhelmed by evidence of innocence. I was a Marine, she was Army. When Marines bleed, we help. When soldiers bleed, we help. That's the code, and it doesn't expire just because time passes or uniforms change. Cross looked up from her notes, something shifting in her expression. You were 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. Yeah. FOB Falcon Fallujah operation. Yeah. Cross turned to Brennan. Rachel served with 2nd Battalion. She's mentioned them before, said they were the toughest sons of bitches she ever saw. Said one of them carried a wounded kid 3 blocks under fire while insurgents tried to turn them into hamburger. Brennan's expression didn't soften, but some of the aggressive certainty drained from his posture. He stood paced 3 steps, turned back. Even if everything you're saying is true, you're still a witness. You're still the first person on scene. That makes you a person of interest, whether you like it or not. I understand. Because from where I sit, you're either a good Samaritan or you're setting up an alibi, and my job is to figure out which. Before Marcus could respond, the trauma bay doors opened, and Mitchell emerged still wearing surgical scrubs, now marked with blood that probably belonged to Rachel. Her expression was carefully neutral, the practiced face of a surgeon who delivered too much bad news to show emotion prematurely. She's stable. We stopped the bleeding, repaired the arterial damage, cleaned out the abdominal wound. She's lost a lot of blood. We've given her 3 units, but she's young, she's strong, and whoever did the initial first aid bought her enough time. Mitchell looked directly at Marcus. She's asking for you. Brennan exploded. Absolutely not. He's a witness, possibly a suspect. There's no way. She's conscious, she's lucid, and she's asking for the man who saved her life. Unless you're charging him with something, you don't get to dictate who she sees. The two of them faced off, institutional authority clashing with medical expertise, neither willing to yield. Finally, Cross stepped between them, her voice carrying the weariness of someone tired of watching men argue over whose authority trumped whose. Let him see her. We'll observe through the window. If she says anything relevant to the investigation, we'll hear it. Brennan looked ready to protest, then seemed to realize he was outnumbered. He gestured toward the recovery area with bitter resignation. Fine, but I'm right there, and Sullivan, don't make me regret this. Mitchell led them down a corridor that smelled like disinfectant and recycled air, past rooms where other traumas played out behind curtains and closed doors. Recovery Room 7 contained Rachel Vance, diminished by hospital bed and medical equipment, IV lines running into her arms, monitors tracking her vitals with electronic precision. Her eyes were open, but drugged, focused on ceiling tiles until the door opened and her gaze found Marcus. He approached the bed with careful movements, aware of Brennan and Cross watching through the observation window, aware that everything said here would be documented and analyzed and used to build whatever narrative law enforcement needed. Rachel's hand lifted slightly, a gesture that might have been reaching or might have been involuntary, and Marcus took it, felt her fingers close around his with surprising strength. You came. Her voice was thick with medication but coherent. I sent the text, didn't know if. I came, you're going to be okay. Dr. Mitchell says you're tough. A ghost of a smile moved across her face. Should have been more careful. You taught us. Always check corners. Fallujah. The memory surfaced, Marcus drilling proper clearing techniques into green troops. Rachel among them, listening with the intense focus of someone who understood that details meant survival. She'd saved his life 3 weeks later, pulling him behind the cover when sniper fire turned their patrol route into kill zone, so maybe they were perpetually evening scores that could never fully balance. What happened, Rachel? Who did this? Her expression darkened, eyes losing some of their drug-induced distance. 3 of them. Black Venom, meeting informant, Eddie Martinez, Ghost. They knew. Someone told them where. Her grip tightened. There's a leak, Marcus, in the department. Someone feeding information to Viper. Through the observation window, Marcus saw Brennan and Cross react, saw them exchange urgent words he couldn't hear. Rachel followed his gaze, seemed to realize they were being observed, and her voice dropped to whisper that pulled Marcus closer. Viper was there, had a knife, said to tell you this was just the beginning. Said you took his brother, now he's taking everything you care about. Her eyes found his suddenly sharp despite the morphine. He knows about the club, about Tommy, about your daughter Lisa. He's been watching you. Cold spread through Marcus's chest, not fear exactly, more like the combat clarity that came from understanding the scope of threat. Viper wasn't just seeking revenge, he was orchestrating something larger, something that turned Marcus's life into battlefield where everyone around him became collateral damage. Did you see who leaked the information? Did you get a name? No, but only 5 people knew about the meeting. Me, Brennan Cross, Captain Morris, and D.A. Winters. She coughed, winced at the pain it caused. One of them, or someone close to them, and Ghost. He ran when shooting started. If he's alive, he has evidence. Recordings, documents. Everything we need. Mitchell appeared in the doorway, her expression brooking no argument. That's enough. She needs rest, and you need to let her heal. Marcus squeezed Rachel's hand, once tried to convey through pressure what words couldn't, that he heard her, that he understood, that he'd handle what came next. Then he released her and stepped back, watching as medication and exhaustion pulled her back towards unconsciousness, her eyes closing against overhead lights that were too bright, too sterile, too far from the darkness where she'd almost died. Brennan and Cross were waiting when Marcus emerged, their faces showing the intensity of detectives who'd just received actionable intelligence during ongoing investigation. Brennan grabbed Marcus's arm, not hostile but urgent, and pulled him toward an empty consultation room. What did she tell you about the leak? Marcus repeated Rachel's words verbatim, watching their reactions, seeing the moment when professional investigation collided with personal betrayal. Cross went pale. Brennan's jaw clenched hard enough to make tendons stand out, and for several seconds, neither of them seemed capable of speech. Finally, Cross found her voice. If there's a leak at that level, if someone in command is feeding black venom, and then everyone working this case is compromised. Brennan finished the thought, then turned to Marcus with expression that contained equal parts desperation and calculation. We need your help. The request landed absurdly, cops asking Hell's Angel for assistance, hierarchy, inverted normal rules suspended by circumstances that recognized no boundary between law enforcement and outlaw. Marcus waited for the punchline, for the setup, for the inevitable betrayal he'd learned to expect from institutional authority. You know the MC world better than we do. You have access to information we can't get through official channels. And Rachel mentioned Ghost Eddie Martinez. If he's alive, if he has evidence, we need to find him before Black Venom does. You want me to locate your informant. I want you to help us save one of our own and catch the people who did this. Brennan's voice carried raw emotion, now protective fury barely contained. Rachel's got a daughter, Maggie's 16 years old. She's going to show up here in about 10 minutes when her grandmother can get her here. And I'm going to have to look that kid in the eye and explain why her mother almost died tonight. So yeah, I'm asking for help from a Hell's Angel, because at this point, I'll take help from anyone who gives a damn. Marcus studied them both, reading sincerity in their desperation, reading the code that said whatever their feelings about Hell's Angels in general, in this moment they recognized shared enemy. He thought about Viper's message about threats against Tommy and Lisa, about the reality that he was already in this fight, whether he wanted to be or not. I'll help, but I work my way. No wires, no surveillance, no official involvement. I get information, I bring it to you. You handle arrests through legal channels. Agreed. And Rachel gets protection, round the clock, no gaps. Cross nodded, already arranging it. 2 officers posted outside her room, rotating shifts. Nobody gets in without clearance. Make it 4 officers and check their backgrounds. If there's a leak, you can't trust anyone. The acknowledgement of how deep the corruption might run visibly shook both detectives, but they nodded agreement. Brennan extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Marcus shook it, sealing a partnership that violated every instinct both men had about the other. One more thing. Brennan's expression hardened. We bring Viper in legally. No vigilante justice, no Old West shootouts. He goes to trial, he goes to prison. That's how this ends. Marcus thought about Cobra dying in parking lot, about 15 years of Viper's rage fermenting into this moment, about the likelihood that legal resolution would satisfy anyone involved. But he nodded, accepting the terms, even as he privately acknowledged that some conflicts didn't end with handcuffs and Miranda rights. He left through the emergency entrance, walked into night air that felt colder than it had hours ago, time having advanced to that dead zone between midnight and dawn when the world felt suspended between days. His bike waited where he'd left it, and he was about to mount when his phone rang. Iron the club president's voice tight with controlled fury. "Where are you?" "St. Mary's. Cop got shot. I was first on scene." "I heard. Also heard it was Rachel Vance. Also heard you were covered in her blood." "What the hell is going on, Reaper?" Marcus leaned against his bike, suddenly exhausted beyond anything physical. "It's complicated." "Uncomplicated. Now." He walked Iron through the evening's events, leaving nothing out, trusting that 35 years of club leadership had taught the president when to listen rather than judge. When he finished, silence stretched across the connection, filled only with ambient noise from whatever environment Iron occupied. Black Venom's making moves, and they're using violence against cops to do it. That brings heat we don't need. I know. Do you? Because right now you're the connection point. They hit a cop to send you a message, which means the entire chapter becomes collateral in whatever personal war you've got with Viper. The accusation stung because it was accurate. Marcus had brought this threat home, had made his club vulnerable through history he couldn't change. "What do you want me to do?" "Come to the clubhouse, now. Full membership meeting in 1 hour. We need to discuss security protocols, figure out if we're going to war or trying to avoid one." Iron paused. "And Marcus, bring honesty. Don't sugarcoat how bad this could get." The line went dead. Marcus sat on his bike, staring at the hospital entrance, where armed officers now stood guard, protecting Rachel from threats that had originated with him, with his past, with choices made 15 years ago that kept echoing forward. He could leave, could ride out of Lodge and never come back, could remove himself from the equation and maybe protect the people around him by sheer absence. But that wasn't how he was built, wasn't what the Marines had taught him, and abandoning Rachel now would be the same as letting Davies die in Fallujah, a betrayal of every code that mattered. He started the engine, let the roar announce his departure, and headed toward the clubhouse through streets that felt hostile now. Every shadow potentially concealing watchers, every vehicle potentially tracking his movement. The paranoia was earned. Black Venom knew his patterns, knew his vulnerabilities, and according to Rachel, they'd been conducting surveillance. He varied his route, took unnecessary turns, checked mirrors, obsessively fell back into combat protocols he hadn't used since Baghdad. The clubhouse appeared through trees like sanctuary or trap, depending on perspective, its lit windows suggesting gathering already underway. Marcus parked beside a dozen other bikes, their chrome reflecting moonlight, their presence representing both protection and complication. He walked toward the entrance with the heaviness of a man about to face judgment from the only family he had left. The main room fell silent when he entered, 28 men turning to assess him, his blood-stained clothes, his exhausted posture, his visible 1,000-yard stare. Tommy stood near the bar, the kid's new patch seeming to weigh him down, his face showing the anxiety of someone who sensed disaster approaching but couldn't identify its shape. Iron sat at the central table beside Hammer, and the VP's expression promised conflict. "Everyone's here." Iron's voice carried absolute authority. "Meeting room, now." They filed through the door marked private, arranging themselves on benches with the familiar choreography of men who'd done this hundreds of times. Marcus took his usual spot, aware of gazes tracking his movement, aware of the blood visible on his shirt, drawing eyes and questions. Iron rapped the gavel 3 times, establishing order. "We got a situation. Black Venom Motorcycle Club has become active in our territory. Tonight they attempted to murder a police officer, and our brother Reaper was first on scene. He's going to explain what happened, and then we're going to discuss how this affects the chapter." Reaper. Marcus stood, felt the weight of 28 pairs of eyes, and began. He walked them through everything: Rachel's warning, the ambush, his involvement in first aid, the hospital, the detective's request for cooperation, Rachel's information about Ghost Martinez having evidence. He left nothing out, including Viper's message, including the threats against Tommy and Lisa, including the reality that his past had become the chapter's present danger. When he finished, silence held for exactly 5 seconds before Hammer stood, his bulk seeming to fill the room beyond physical dimensions. This is exactly what I warned about. Reaper helps a cop, and now we're in the middle of police business. We're going to have detectives sniffing around, we're going to have heat, and all because one member can't let go of playing soldier. The attack was personal, designed to wound, and Marcus felt it land even as he maintained external calm. But before he could respond, Preacher stood, the old member's voice carrying the authority of age and long memory. Reaper didn't create this situation. Viper did 15 years ago when his brother attacked that woman. Marcus did what any of us would have done, stopped a violent assault. The fact that it ended with Cobra dead is tragedy, but it's not Marcus's fault. And tonight, Hammer turned his aggression on Preacher. Finding that cop, calling it in, getting involved, that's not his fault either. He could have walked away, could have let police handle police problems. Instead, he plays hero and drags us into a war with Black Venom. Tommy stood in the room tensed because prospects, even newly patched members, didn't interrupt during serious club business. But the kid's voice was steady, carrying conviction that bordered on reckless. Reaper taught me that honor matters more than convenience. That when someone needs help, you help them. Isn't that what this club's supposed to be about? Brotherhood, loyalty, standing up when others would walk away? Hammer's face went red, veins standing out on his forehead. You've been a full member for 3 hours, kid. Don't presume to lecture me about what this club means. Then maybe you should remember what it meant when you were young, when you needed someone to stand with you instead of judge you. The room erupted in argument, multiple members shouting over each other, the careful order of club meeting dissolving into chaos that threatened to fracture relationships built over decades. Iron brought the gavel down hard enough to crack wood, the sound cutting through noise with physical force. Enough. Silence crashed back, everyone frozen in whatever gesture they'd been making, whatever word they'd been about to speak. Iron stood slowly, his face showing something Marcus had never seen before: exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness, a weariness that seemed to come from his bones. Derek makes a point. This situation brings heat. It complicates our relationship with law enforcement. It puts the chapter at risk. Iron paused, looked directly at Marcus. But Preacher and Tommy also make points. We don't abandon our principles just because following them is dangerous. And we don't throw brothers to the wolves because their past creates problems. Hammer started to object, but Iron silenced him with a raised hand. Here's what's going to happen. Marcus continues working with police. He overrode the protests before they could build momentum. But he does it as individual, not as club representative. Black Venom comes after him, we defend our brother. But we're not going to war over this. We're going to be smart, careful, and legal. Anyone got problems with that approach, now's the time to speak. The silence that followed contained consent mixed with resentment, acceptance layered with doubt. Nobody spoke, which meant nobody openly defied presidential decision, which meant the matter was settled according to club law, even if personal feelings remained unresolved. Good. Now, security protocols. We increase patrols, we travel in pairs. Minimum, we stay alert. Blade you coordinate watch rotations. Make sure someone's always at the clubhouse. Make sure nobody's alone and vulnerable. Marcus, you're at high risk. I want you checking in twice daily. And if you're going anywhere isolated, you take backup. Marcus nodded, accepting the restriction, even as it chafed against his instinct for solitude. Iron continued laying out protocols, establishing procedures, transforming loose association into something more structured, more military, more appropriate for an organization preparing for conflict. The meeting ended 90 minutes later, members dispersing with new assignments, new awareness, new understanding that their comfortable routine had been disrupted by external threat. Marcus remained seated as others filed out, exhaustion pinning him to the bench like physical weight. Iron approached, lowered himself onto the bench beside Marcus, with careful movements that suggested pain he was hiding. You did the right thing tonight, helping that cop. Don't let Hammer make you doubt it. I brought this on the club. Viper brought this on the club. You're just the excuse he's using. Iron was quiet for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Read this later. when you're alone. Marcus took the paper, felt its weight, resisted the urge to unfold it immediately. Iron stood, placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder with unusual gentility. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. Tommy was waiting in the main room when Marcus emerged, the kid perched on a bar stool nursing a beer. He wasn't really drinking. When he saw Marcus, relief flooded his face so obviously it was almost painful to witness. I thought I was worried Hammer might convince them to expel you. Takes more than Hammer's opinion to expel a member. But thanks for speaking up. Took courage. Tommy shrugged, trying for casual and missing. Just said what was true. He hesitated, then plunged ahead with the question clearly consuming him. Is the cop going to make it Sergeant Vance? She's tough. Mitchell thinks she'll pull through. Good. That's good. Tommy finished his beer in one long swallow, set the bottle down with careful precision. I meant what I said in there, about honor mattering. You taught me that, whether you meant to or not. Marcus felt the weight of being someone's example, someone's North Star, in a world that offered precious few fixed points to navigate by. He wanted to tell Tommy that he was a terrible role model, that following Marcus's lead had cost him his marriage and his relationship with his daughter, and nearly cost Rachel Vance her life tonight. But the kid needed something to believe in, needed someone to show him that choices mattered beyond immediate self-interest. Just remember, honor's expensive. It costs you things you didn't know you'd have to pay. Make sure you're willing to pay before you commit. I'm willing. The simple certainty of youth. The belief that intention equaled outcome, that doing right would produce right results. Marcus remembered feeling that way once before Iraq taught him that the universe didn't operate on moral accounting, that good men died and bad men prospered, and trying to find pattern in chaos was exercise in futility. Go home, Tommy. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. The kid left reluctantly, glancing back twice as if worried Marcus might disappear if unwatched. Then Marcus was alone in the clubhouse except for Axel tending bar, and he sat on the same stool Tommy had vacated, accepted the whiskey Axel poured without being asked, and drank it while staring at his reflection in the mirror behind the bottles. His phone showed 4 missed calls from Lisa, 3 text messages demanding he call her back. Apparently, news of Rachel Vance's shooting had made Seattle News Cycle local police sergeant critically wounded in Lodge, Montana, and Lisa had seen his name mentioned as witness who'd provided first aid. He called her back, bracing for conversation he didn't have energy to navigate. She answered on first ring. Dad, what the hell is going on? I found a cop who'd been shot. I helped her. That's all. That's all the news is saying. She was investigating motorcycle gangs, saying there might be connection to... She stopped herself, but the implication hung there. Connection to Hell's Angels. Connection to the life Marcus led that Lisa had spent her adult years pretending didn't exist. She's a friend. From the war. She needed help, and I gave it. A friend from the war. You never mentioned any friends from the war. I don't mention a lot of things. Silence stretched between them, filled with accumulated years of distance neither knew how to bridge. Finally, Lisa's voice came back, smaller, younger, the voice of the 6-year-old who'd asked why Daddy had to leave. Are you safe? Is someone trying to hurt you? The question opened doors Marcus desperately wanted to keep closed, revealing the care that existed beneath their careful estrangement. He could lie, could maintain the fiction that everything was fine, that he was in control, that she didn't need to worry about a father she barely knew. Or he could offer truth, could acknowledge a vulnerability, could risk the kind of honesty that might close distance or might confirm her worst beliefs about the life he'd chosen. There's a situation with a rival club. It's being handled. Dad, Lisa, I'm 58 years old. I've survived war. I've survived 30 years with the Hells Angels. I've survived things you don't know about, and I hope you never have to. I'll survive this too. You survived them, but did you survive them intact? Or did you just keep moving forward, keep accumulating damage until there was nothing left of the person you used to be? The insight cut deeper than she probably intended, revealing that Lisa had been paying attention all these years, had been cataloging his transformation from father to stranger to cautionary tale. He wanted to defend himself, wanted to explain that becoming someone else had been survival strategy, not choice, that the man she remembered from childhood couldn't have endured the things life demanded. But explanations felt like excuses, and he'd never been good at those. Get some sleep. I'm fine. No, you're not, but you're stubborn enough to pretend until it's true. Her voice softened marginally. Be careful. And Dad, maybe after this is over, you could visit. We could talk, actually talk. The invitation hung between them, fragile and precious, the kind of opening that came once in a lifetime if you were lucky. Marcus wanted to accept it immediately, wanted to schedule flights and dates and concrete commitments that would force him to follow through. But accepting meant surviving, meant resolving the black venom situation, meant dealing with cancer he still hadn't fully committed to fighting. I'd like that. Okay, good. Call me tomorrow. Let me know you're still alive. She ended the call before he could respond, leaving him staring at his phone with mix of hope and dread that felt uncomfortable after years of carefully maintained emotional numbness. Axel refilled his glass without comment, respecting the invisible barrier that kept bartenders from asking questions when members needed silence more than conversation. Marcus pulled out the folded paper Iron had given him, opened it to reveal the president's careful handwriting, block letters that looked almost military in their precision. The message was brief, contained on single page, but its weight exceeded its length. Marcus will have stage 4 lung cancer, 6 months, maybe less. Nobody knows except you. I'm telling you because I need you to be ready. When I'm gone, this chapter needs strong leadership. Hammer wants the position, but Hammer will break us apart. He's too rigid, too stuck in the past. You're the only member with a combination of combat experience, respect from the ranks, and vision to lead us into whatever comes next. I know you'll say you're not qualified. I know you'll point to your divorce, your relationship with Lisa, the cancer. I suspect you're also carrying based on the doctor's appointment you won't discuss. But leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to stand when others sit, being willing to make hard calls, being willing to sacrifice personal comfort for collective good. You've done that your whole life in Iraq in the club tonight when you saved that cop. That's who you are, Marcus. Not the lone wolf you pretend to be, but the warrior who shows up when the situation demands it. Think about it. We'll talk more later. But know this: when I nominate you for president, it's because I believe you're the only member capable of leading us through what's coming. Stay safe, brother. Iron Marcus read it twice, then folded it carefully and returned it to his pocket, feeling the weight of responsibility settling over him like armor he hadn't asked to wear. President of Lodge Chapter. A position he'd never wanted, never sought, never imagined himself capable of fulfilling. And Iron expected him to assume it while fighting cancer, while dodging black venom, while trying to repair a relationship with daughter he'd failed for decades. The absurdity should have made him laugh. Instead, it made him tired, the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who'd been fighting since he was 18 years old and couldn't remember what peace felt like. He finished his whiskey, stood, nodded thanks to Axel, and walked toward the door. His bike waited in the parking lot, patient metal companion that had carried him through more miles than he could count. He straddled it, felt the familiar geometry, started the engine, but didn't immediately ride away. Instead, he sat there listening to the idle watching moonlight filter through tree branches, thinking about Rachel Vance fighting for her life in a hospital bed, about Tommy newly patched and vulnerable to threats he didn't understand, about Iron dying slowly while trying to hold a fractious club together, about Lisa offering reconciliation he didn't know how to accept, about Vipers circling closer with violence that wouldn't stop until one of them was dead. The engine's rumble finally pulled him from paralysis, and he released the clutch, let momentum carry him down the access road toward the highway, toward home, toward whatever tomorrow would demand. The ride took him through darkness, broken only by his headlight, past houses where people slept in safety, purchased through ignorance of dangers that prowled beyond their awareness. He envied them, their illusions, their ability to believe that being good meant being safe, that following rules meant protection from chaos. His cabin appeared through the trees, and he killed the engine before turning into the driveway, coasting the last 100 yards in silence, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Nothing obvious registered, but he approached the door with drawn weapon anyway, cleared each room with combat precision, found no evidence of intrusion beyond the persistent sense that eyes had been here, that his space had been violated by presence that left no physical trace. He sat at the kitchen table, opened his laptop, pulled up the email from Dr. Keller that had been waiting since this afternoon, since before Rachel, before Tommy's patch, before everything changed. The oncologist's message remained unchanged, treatment options, and survival statistics laid out with clinical precision. Marcus composed a reply typed 8 words that felt both insignificant and monumental. Schedule the consultation, I'm ready to fight this. He sent it before doubt could intervene, then closed the laptop and sat in darkness, listening to his cabin settle around him, feeling the pull of exhaustion that promised sleep if he'd let it come. But sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant Fallujah, meant his sister's crash site, meant Cobra dying in parking lot, meant all the ghosts he'd accumulated, who waited for darkness to remind him that survival wasn't the same as living. His phone buzzed. Brennan message brief, Vance stable, asking for you again tomorrow morning. Also, Captain Morris didn't show for shift. Wife says he left last night, hasn't been home. Need to talk ASAP. Marcus typed back confirmation, then set the phone aside and moved to the window, staring out at forest that concealed predators both animal and human, wondering which kind would come for him. First, wondering if Ghost Martinez was still alive somewhere out there, wondering if any of them would survive what was coming. The night offered no answers, just darkness and cold, and the certainty that tomorrow would bring new complications, new threats, new choices between what was easy and what was right. Marcus Sullivan, 58 years old, cancer growing in his body, ghosts haunting his past, stood alone in his cabin and made the only decision that mattered. He would show up. He would fight. And he would protect the people who'd been foolish enough to care about him, even if it cost him everything. Outside, the forest was silent. But somewhere in that silence, Vincent Viper Castellano was planning his next move, and Eddie Ghost Martinez was hiding with the evidence that could end Black Venom's reign, and Captain Morris was missing with knowledge that could expose the leak, and all of it was converging on Marcus Sullivan like tides pulled by gravity he couldn't control. The war had begun, and this time there would be no ambiguity about who survived and who didn't. Dawn arrived like an accusation, pale light filtering through pine branches to expose Marcus's cabin in all its stark impermanence, a structure that had never quite become home despite 12 years of occupation. He'd slept 3 hours in fractured intervals, each awakening, triggered by sounds that might have been wind or might have been footsteps, his hand moving automatically toward the .45 on the nightstand before consciousness caught up to reflex. The final time he woke at 5:47, according to the digital clock that glowed like a small green verdict, he abandoned the pretense of rest and moved through his morning routine with mechanical precision. Coffee first strong enough to strip paint, the ritual of grinding beans and measuring water providing structure when his mind wanted to spiral into infinite complications. He stood at the kitchen window watching light strengthen across the clearing, cataloging sightlines and approach vectors the way he'd done in Fallujah, the way he apparently couldn't stop doing now that Black Venom had transformed his property from sanctuary into potential battlefield. A deer emerged from the tree line, paused to test the air, then disappeared back into forest with the kind of fluid grace that reminded Marcus how clumsy humans were, in comparison how vulnerable despite their weapons and their certainty. His phone showed 2 messages, Brennan confirming Rachel wanted to see him at 10, and Tommy asking if Marcus needed company for the hospital visit. He responded to Brennan with single-word confirmation, told Tommy to focus on his garage shift and stay visible, stay surrounded by witnesses who could testify he was nowhere near whatever violence Viper might be orchestrating. The kid's enthusiasm made him a target, made him leverage Black Venom could use, and keeping Tommy safe meant keeping him distant, even as it contradicted every instinct about brotherhood requiring proximity. The shower ran hot enough to hurt steam filling the cramped bathroom, while Marcus stood under spray that couldn't quite wash away the persistent sensation of Rachel's blood on his hands. He'd scrubbed them 3 times last night, watched rusty water circle the drain, but the feeling remained phantom. Weight, phantom, responsibility for violence he hadn't committed, but hadn't prevented either. Viper's message echoed through his thoughts. This is just the beginning. Not threat exactly, more like promise, the kind of declarative statement that said outcomes were already determined, that resistance would only change the manner of suffering, not its inevitability. He dressed in clean clothes, strapped on the .45. With practiced efficiency, pulled on his leather vest that had been returned from the hospital in a plastic bag marked personal effects. The vest showed damage, Rachel's blood stained into the leather in patterns that resembled continental drift geographic markers of how close she'd come to dying. He should have thrown it away, should have replaced it with new leather unmarked by consequence. Instead, he wore it like evidence, like testimony, like visual reminder of why the easy choice wasn't always the right one. The ride to St. Mary's took him through Lodge's morning commute civilians, heading to jobs that paid mortgages and funded retirements, their faces showing the stress of people who believed their problems were large because they'd never encountered genuinely large problems. Marcus envied them their illusions. Even as he despised the fragility, those illusions represented the belief that safety was natural state, that violence was aberration, that bad things happened to other people, in other places but never here. Never to us, never to anyone who followed the rules. The hospital parking lot was half full, early shift arriving, while night shift departed the eternal rotation of medical personnel, fighting entropy one patient at a time. Marcus parked his bike near the emergency entrance, where security cameras provided coverage, where his Harley would be visible to anyone watching, where leaving would require passing through choke points that could be defended or avoided, depending on situation. Paranoia felt appropriate given circumstances felt less like mental illness and more like tactical awareness that had kept him breathing through conflicts that killed men with slower reflexes. Inside the hospital had transformed from last night's chaos into something approaching normalcy, controlled traffic flow, muted conversations, the mechanical rhythm of institutional care. The desk nurse recognized him, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something warmer, more human. Sergeant Vance is awake and asking for you. Room 412, fourth floor. Detective Brennan is already up there. Marcus took the elevator, watched floor numbers increment, with mechanical certainty emerged into a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. 4 uniformed officers flanked Rachel's door, now instead of 2, their postures suggesting alertness edging toward boredom, the stance of people assigned to guard duty who didn't genuinely believe threats would materialize during their watch. They straightened when Marcus approached, hands moving toward weapons with automatic caution. Marcus Sullivan, Sergeant Vance asked to see me. The lead officer, nameplate reading Davidson, spoke into his radio, received confirmation, then stepped aside with the careful distance of someone allowing access while maintaining readiness to revoke it instantly. Marcus pushed through the door into a private room where Rachel lay propped on elevated bed, looking significantly better than last night, but still diminished. Still marked by trauma that had nearly killed her. Brennan stood by the window, silhouetted against morning light, his face showing exhaustion that suggested he'd been here all night. He turned when Marcus entered, offered slight nod that contained acknowledgement, and continued wariness, mixed in proportions Marcus couldn't quite calculate. Sullivan, thanks for coming. Rachel's eyes found Marcus with focus that suggested pain medication had been reduced, that doctors had decided she was stable enough to tolerate discomfort in exchange for clarity. Her right hand lifted slightly in greeting, IV line trailing behind like tether, keeping her connected to machines that monitored her continued existence. You look better than last night. Low bar. Her voice was stronger, less drugged, carrying traces of the competence he remembered from Iraq. Dr. Mitchell says I'll recover. Says the field medicine you did bought me enough time. She paused, seemed to be gathering strength. Thank you for not walking away. Marines don't walk away. Apparently neither do Hell's Angels. The observation landed with weight. Neither of them wanted to examine implications about loyalties that transcended organizational affiliation, about codes that operated beneath surface antagonisms. Brennan cleared his throat, pulling attention back to present circumstances. Rachel's been briefing me on her investigation. She's agreed to bring you into the loop given your unique position. His tone suggested he still wasn't comfortable with this arrangement, but had accepted necessity overrode preference. But first I need to know, has Black Venom made any direct contact with you since last night? Marcus shook his head. Nothing. But they know where I live, they know my patterns. If they wanted contact, they'd have made it. Which means they're waiting, building towards something. Brennan moved to the bed, pulled up a chair, gestured for Marcus to do the same. Rachel's investigation has been tracking Black Venom's distribution network. They're running fentanyl through Lodge, using the town as hub for wider distribution across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. Conservative estimate puts their operation at $2 million annually, with growth trajectory suggesting they're expanding aggressively. Rachel picked up the narrative, her voice steady despite obvious pain. Viper's the operational VP, handles enforcement and logistics. But he's not the brains. There's someone above him. Someone providing protection and intelligence that's kept them ahead of law enforcement for 18 months. Every time we've gotten close to making arrests, they've known in advance. Raids hitting empty warehouses, informants disappearing, evidence vanishing before we could secure it. The leak. The leak. Rachel's expression hardened. 5 people knew about my meeting with Ghost yesterday, me, Brennan Cross, Captain Morris, and D.A. Winters. One of them told Black Venom, or someone close to them did, and until we identify who everyone working this case is compromised. Marcus processed the implications, military training, automatically arranging information into threat assessments and operational vulnerabilities. You can't trust your own department, which means you can't use official channels. You need information from outside the system. That's where you come in. Brennan leaned forward, elbows on knees, face showing the intensity of a man making decisions he'd never imagined having to make. You have access to the outlaw world we don't. You can ask questions, gather intelligence, make connections that would get us stonewalled or worse. You help us find Ghost, help us identify the leak, and we'll make sure when arrests happen, they're clean and legal. And if we find Viper first, if he comes after me or Tommy or anyone in my club, you call us. You don't engage, you don't retaliate, you call for backup and let law enforcement handle it. Brennan held Marcus's gaze with expression that suggested he knew how unlikely compliance was, but needed to state parameters anyway. I know that's not how your world works. I know the club has its own justice system. But if you want this to end with Viper in prison instead of you in a cell or grave, you play it legal. Marcus thought about Iron's message about the president's expectation that he'd lead the chapter towards something resembling legitimacy, toward engagement with society rather than opposition to it. He thought about Tommy's faith that honor mattered more than convenience, about Lisa's offer to reconnect if he survived current complications. Playing it legal meant accepting constraints that chafed against instinct, meant trusting a system he had spent decades viewing as adversary. But maybe that was the point. Maybe becoming something better required doing things differently, even when different felt wrong. I'll work with you, but I need something in exchange. Brennan's expression suggested he'd been expecting this. What protection for Tommy Chen? He's newly patched, 23 years old, and Viper mentioned him by name as potential target. Put surveillance on him, make sure Black Venom knows he's being watched. We can't justify protective details for Hell's Angels members based on threats that might be theoretical. Then make it not theoretical. Use him as bait if you have to, but keep him safe while you're doing it. Rachel spoke up from the bed, her voice carrying authority despite her horizontal position. We can do that. Discreet surveillance, protective, follow justification being he's potential witness to my assault since he was at the clubhouse when Marcus got the call. She looked at Brennan. It's within policy parameters, and it gives us additional eyes on Black Venom activity. Brennan considered, then nodded reluctant acceptance. Fine, but Sullivan, you keep that kid out of trouble. I don't want him doing anything stupid trying to prove himself. Agreed. They spent the next 90 minutes walking through Rachel's investigation in detail. Distribution routes known, Black Venom members, financial transactions that suggested money laundering through legitimate businesses, connections to suppliers in Canada who were themselves connected to cartels operating out of Mexico. The scope was larger than Marcus had imagined, transforming what he'd thought of as local motorcycle club into node and international trafficking network worth hundreds of millions. Rachel had been close to breaking it open, had identified a weak link, Edward Ghost Martinez, former Black Venom member, who'd left the club 2 years ago and was trying to go straight. Ghost worked at an auto repair shop, kept his head down, wanted nothing to do with his former life. But Rachel had convinced him to cooperate, had promised witness protection and immunity in exchange for testimony about Black Venom's operations. The meeting where she'd been ambushed was supposed to be final evidence transfer. Ghost was bringing documents, photographs, recordings that would have formed foundation of comprehensive federal case. Ghost is terrified now. He's gone dark, won't answer calls, probably thinks I'm dead, and Black Venom is coming for him next. Rachel shifted in bed, wincing at the pain movement caused. If you could find him, convince him to still cooperate, it would salvage the investigation. He's got a sister in Billings, Jennifer Martinez, works at the hospital there. That's the only lead we have. Marcus filed the information, already thinking through approaches, how to find someone who didn't want finding, how to convince someone legitimately terrified to trust promises from people who'd already failed to protect the last cop who tried to help them. It would require leverage, would require understanding. Ghost psychology would require offering something beyond assurances that wouldn't survive contact with Black Venom's reach. A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. Lieutenant Cross entered her face showing strain that suggested whatever news she carried wasn't good. She glanced at Marcus, seemed to decide his presence was acceptable given circumstances, then focused on Rachel. "We've got a problem. Captain Morris is in the wind. Didn't show up for shift this morning, not answering his phone. His wife says he left yesterday evening and hasn't been home." The information landed like percussion implications detonating in rapid sequence. If Morris was the leak, and if he disappeared, it meant either he'd been compromised himself or he was actively involved beyond simple information sharing. Either scenario suggested the investigation was more corrupted than they'd hoped, that the rod extended further than single bad actor feeding intelligence to criminals. Brennan swore with creative fluency, paced 3 tight circles, then turned to Cross. "His financials. Running them now. Preliminary check shows nothing obvious, but if he's smart, he'd be using offshore accounts or cryptocurrency." "What about his son?" Rachel's question pulled everyone's attention. "Stephen Morris died of overdose 5 years ago. Captain blamed dealers, blamed the system, went through severe depression. Could be relevant." Cross nodded slowly, making connections visible in her expression. Black Venom approaches him with pitch about controlling distribution, reducing harm, making drugs safer. Appeals to his grief, his sense that the system failed his son. He convinces himself he's helping rather than enabling. Then evidence piles up that they're making things worse, not better. Deaths increase, distribution expands, and Morris realizes he's trapped. Can't expose them without exposing himself. Can't stop them because they own him. Brennan's voice carried weary recognition, the tone of someone who'd seen this pattern before. So he runs, either to them for protection or from everyone including them. Marcus listened to them reconstruct Morris's likely trajectory, watched law enforcement personnel grapple with betrayal from within their ranks, understood that their institutional faith was shattering in real time. It reminded him of Iraq, of discovering that friendly fire had killed more Marines in his unit than enemy action, of the corrosion that came from realizing danger could wear familiar face. "I'll find Ghost." The statement emerged before Marcus fully decided to make it instinct overriding calculation. If Morris is involved, Ghost probably knows details about the arrangement. Either way, getting him to safety and getting his evidence becomes priority. You'd need to move fast. Black Venom knows about Ghost, knows he was Rachel's informant. They'll be looking for him too. Cross pulled out her phone, started typing. "I'll send you what we have on his known associates, his last confirmed location, his vehicle description. But Marcus, if you find him, you bring him directly to us. No stops, no delays, no trusting anyone else with his safety." "Understood." Rachel called him closer, her hand reaching for his with urgency that transcended her injuries. When he was near enough, she pulled him down so she could whisper without others hearing clearly. "Ghost has a daughter, 8 years old, lives with her mother in Billings. Lily. If Black Venom finds him first, they'll use her as leverage. Keep that in mind when you're convincing him to trust you." Marcus nodded, filing the information under tactical considerations that made already complicated situation exponentially more dangerous. Protecting Ghost meant protecting his daughter, which meant ensuring Black Venom never identified her location, which meant moving with speed and precision that left no trail for enemies to follow. He left the hospital 20 minutes later, with phone full of information about Ghost Martinez and head full of strategic calculations about how to locate someone who'd been trained by Black Venom to disappear. The morning had advanced toward noon, temperature climbing into the 40s, snow melting from rooftops in patterns that looked like tears running down the faces of buildings. His bike started with familiar roar, and he headed toward the auto shop where Ghost had worked, not because he expected to find the man there, but because physical spaces sometimes revealed information people left behind without realizing. The shop sat in Lodge's industrial district, a 3-bay garage with hand-painted sign advertising honest repairs, fair prices. The kind of establishment that survived on reputation rather than marketing. The owner, a man in his 60s with hands permanently stained by grease, looked up from an engine rebuild when Marcus entered. Recognition flickered across his face. Hell's Angels weren't subtle, and the vest Marcus wore functioned as advertising, even when anonymity would be preferable. Help you. Looking for Eddie Martinez. Ghost. He working today. The owner's expression closed down wariness, replacing casual professionalism. Eddie don't work here no more. Left few days ago, didn't say where he was going. He in trouble. Don't know, don't care. He kept his head down, did good work, never brought drama to my shop. That's all I can tell you. Marcus read the man's body language, protective, suspicious. Probably loyal to Ghost in the way that employers defended good employees, even when those employees carried complicated histories. He pulled $200 bills from his wallet, set them on the counter with careful deliberation. I'm not here to cause problems for Eddie. I'm here to help him. He's got information about people who are dangerous, and those people are looking for him. If you know anything that could help me find him first, it might save his life. The owner stared at the money at Marcus at some middle distance where moral calculations happen. Finally, he sighed, the sound containing resignation and concern mixed together. He mentioned his sister a few times. Jennifer Martinez lives in Billings on the north side. Works at the hospital there, I think. Administrative office, third floor. That's all I got. Marcus left the bills on the counter, offered thanks, and returned to his bike. Billings was 2 hours east highway riding that would eat up the afternoon, but provide time to think through approach. He called Tommy while still in the parking lot, needing to check in, needing to confirm the kid was safe and visible. Reaper, hey, I'm at the garage, everything's good. Got like 6 witnesses, including my boss, watching me change oil and rotate tires. Plus, I think there's a cop following me, unmarked sedan, been parked across the street for an hour. That's your protection detail. Brennan's orders. Don't lose them. Protection from what? From making mistakes. Stay visible, stay at work, don't go anywhere alone. I'm heading to Billings for the day, won't be back until tonight. You need backup. I need you to stay put and not do anything that draws attention. Can you handle that? Yeah, I can handle it. Tommy's voice carried offense at the question, proving he was still young enough to think courage and caution were mutually exclusive. Just be careful. Okay, Viper's out there. I'm always careful. The lie came smoothly, automatic reassurance that both of them knew wasn't true, but needed to exchange anyway, because that's what approximated care looked like between men who'd been trained to suppress vulnerability. Marcus ended the call, started his bike, and pointed it toward the highway that would carry him east through Montana landscape that looked desolate in winter, all the color leached out, leaving only variations of gray and white and brown. The ride provided rhythm without distraction, his mind processing the investigation's moving parts, while his body handled the mechanical demands of controlling a motorcycle at highway speeds. Morris disappearing suggested either panic or calculation, either running from everyone or running toward Black Venom's protection. Ghost hiding meant he understood the danger meant Rachel's attack had served its purpose of demonstrating what happened to people who cooperated with law enforcement. Finding Ghost required offering something more valuable than fear, hope, protection, guarantee that cooperation wouldn't end with him bleeding out in an alley. Billings emerged from flatness like civilization's compromise with emptiness, buildings rising against horizon in defiance of space that suggested human presence was temporary intrusion rather than permanent establishment. Marcus navigated to the north side, used his phone to locate the hospital where Ghost's sister supposedly worked, found visitor parking, and entered through main entrance that smelled like every hospital antiseptic covering decay sterility imposed on biology's messy reality. The information desk directed him to Jennifer Martinez in administration, third floor office 314. He took stairs instead of elevator, using the climb to transition from riding mode to people mode to arrange his face into something less threatening, to remember how to interact with civilians who had no context for understanding what his vest represented. Jennifer Martinez looked up when he knocked, her expression immediately wary. She was younger than Ghost by several years, maybe 35, with the same sharp features and dark eyes that suggested intelligence operating behind careful reserve. She took in his appearance, the vest, the patches, the general aura of someone who existed outside normal social contracts, and her hand moved toward her phone with obvious intent. I'm not here to cause problems. I'm looking for your brother Eddie. He's in danger and I can help. I don't know where he is. The statement came too quickly, too rehearsed, proving she absolutely knew, and was protecting him with the kind of loyalty that suggested Ghost had earned her trust through actions rather than just blood relation. Marcus stayed in the doorway, didn't close the door, kept his hands visible so she could track them, maintained every element of non-threatening body language he could manufacture. Black Venom tried to kill a police officer 2 nights ago, Sergeant Rachel Vance. She's investigating them, and your brother was helping her. Now they're looking for Eddie, and when they find him, they'll kill him. I can prevent that, but only if I get to him first. Why would I trust you? You're Hell's Angels. You're exactly the kind of people Eddie's been trying to get away from. Because Rachel Vance asked me to find him. Because I pulled her out of an alley where she was bleeding to death. Because I'm the only person offering to help your brother who has the skills to actually do it. Marcus paused, letting that sink in. And because Eddie has a daughter, Lily, 8 years old, if Black Venom gets to Eddie, they won't stop there. They'll use Lily to make him talk to find out what he told Rachel to make sure he suffers before they kill him. Is that what you want? Jennifer's face went pale, the color draining so quickly, Marcus thought she might faint. She sat down heavily in her chair, stared at her desk, seemed to be having internal debate about trust and risk and which betrayal would cost more. How do you know about Lily? Rachel told me, before she went into surgery. She said to remind Eddie that protecting him means protecting his daughter, and that can't happen if he's hiding from everyone, including the people trying to help. Jennifer studied him with intensity that suggested she'd developed good instincts for evaluating threats, probably necessity, given her brother's history. She pulled up something on her computer, wrote an address on sticky note with shaking hand, then held it out like she was handing over something infinitely more valuable than paper and ink. He's at my cabin, about 40 miles northwest of here, up in the Beartooth Mountains. There's barely any cell service. You'll need to drive there. She paused, met his eyes directly. If you're lying, if you hurt him, I'll make sure every cop in Montana knows exactly who you are and what you did. Fair enough. Marcus took the note, memorized the address, then handed it back to her. One more thing. Do you have a recent photo of Eddie, something I can show him so he knows you sent me? Jennifer hesitated, then pulled out her phone, scrolled through images, selected one, showing her and Ghost at what looked like a family barbecue. Both smiling, both relaxed, both looking like people who'd found peace after turbulent history. She sent it to Marcus's number, and his phone buzzed with the incoming message. Thank you. I'll bring him back safe. You better. He's all the family I have left. The drive northwest took him out of Billings and into mountains that rose like ancient monuments to geological violence, peaks still holding snow that wouldn't melt until late spring. The highway degraded into mountain roads that degraded into dirt tracks, that tested his bike's suspension and his own skill keeping it upright on surfaces that alternated between mud and ice. The address Jennifer had provided led to a cabin even more isolated than Marcus's own, tucked into valleys surrounded by pine forest that blocked sightlines and muffled sound. He approached slowly, engine idling, watching for movement, for the glint of rifle scope, for any indication Ghost had decided to fortify his position. The cabin looked abandoned from distance, no smoke from chimney, no vehicle visible, no obvious signs of the habitation. Marcus killed the engine 300 yards out, continued on foot, moving with combat tactics that felt appropriate for a situation that could turn lethal with minimal warning. Eddie Martinez, Ghost, I'm Marcus Sullivan, Hell's Angel. Jennifer sent me. Rachel Vance is alive and she needs your help. His voice carried across the clearing, without echo, absorbed by forest that felt oppressively present. No response came, no movement, no sound beyond wind through branches and distant bird-calling territory. Marcus continued forward, maintaining visibility, keeping hands away from weapons, broadcasting non-aggression through body language, while remaining ready to react if aggression manifested from unexpected direction. The cabin's door opened suddenly, revealing Ghost Martinez, with shotgun pointed at Marcus's center mass finger on trigger, eyes showing the wildness that came from fear, mixing with exhaustion, mixing with desperate determination. He was smaller than Marcus expected from the investigation files, maybe 5'8", 160 wiry build, suggesting speed over power face that had seen too many bad decisions accumulated over too few years. Dark hair hung past his shoulders unkempt, and 3 days of stubble covered his jaw. He looked like a man who'd been running for a while and knew the running was almost over. Stop right there. I don't know you. I don't trust you, and I'll blow you in half if you take another step. Marcus stopped, raised his hands shoulder height, made himself as non-threatening as possible. While wearing vest that marked him as member of organization, Ghost had spent years trying to escape. Rachel's alive. She's in St. Mary's Hospital recovering from surgery. She told me about your evidence about the case you were building against Black Venom. I'm here to get you somewhere safe so that work doesn't die with her. Bullshit. Rachel's dead. They killed her, and now you're here to finish me. Check your phone. If you've got signal, pull up news from Lodge. Rachel Vance, police sergeant, shot but survived. I'm the one who found her, who did first aid, who got her to the hospital. Marcus kept his voice level, reasonable, the tone of someone stating facts rather than pleading case. I'm not Black Venom. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because Rachel asked me to find you before they do. Ghost's hands trembled on the shotgun finger, still on trigger, internal debate, visible in the micro-expressions crossing his face. Marcus could see the calculation happening. Trust a Hell's Angel wearing blood-stained vest, or stay hidden, and hope Black Venom never found this location. Neither option was good, both carried risk, and Ghost knew it. Why would Hell's Angels help a cop? Because Rachel and I served together in Iraq. Because she saved my life once, and I saved hers 2 nights ago. Because whether you believe it or not, some of us still follow codes that matter more than organizational loyalty. Marcus slowly reached for his phone, moving with exaggerated care so Ghost wouldn't interpret it as reaching for weapon. Jennifer sent me. Look. He held up the phone, showing the barbecue photo, Jennifer and Ghost smiling in sunlight, image of normalcy and family that felt like artifact from different universe. Ghost's expression shifted, shotgun lowering marginally as he recognized the picture, recognized the implicit message that his sister trusted this stranger enough to reveal his location. Jennifer told you where I am. She's worried about you, about Lily. She knows Black Venom won't stop with just you. They'll go after everyone you care about to make sure the evidence stays buried. Marcus lowered his hands slowly, non-threatening. Let me help. Let me get you and Lily somewhere safe. Let me make sure the evidence gets to people who can use it to put Viper away for good. Ghost studied Marcus for long seconds, then seemed to reach decision. He lowered the shotgun completely, stepped aside from doorway, gestured for Marcus to enter. The cabin's interior was sparse camping gear, supplies sufficient for extended isolation, laptop that presumably held the evidence. Rachel had mentioned duffel bag that probably contained Ghost's entire life reduced to what he could carry. Ghost moved to check his phone, struggled with signal, finally got enough bars to load news websites. His face transformed when he saw headlines confirming Marcus's story. Lodge police sergeant survives ambush. Hell's Angel credited with saving officer's life. Jesus, I thought when I heard shots when I ran, I thought they'd killed her. Ghost's voice broke, guilt and relief mixing together. I left her there. I heard the ambush start and I ran. You did what she told you to do. She went into that meeting knowing it might be a trap. Your job was to survive and protect the evidence. That's what you did. Some protection. Ghost gestured at the cabin, at his isolation, at the accumulated fear visible in every detail of his makeshift sanctuary. I've been up here for 2 days, jumping at every sound, expecting them to kick down the door any second. They will find you eventually. Black Venom's good at what they do, and you left a trail getting here. Vehicle, gas stations, security cameras, all breadcrumbs they can follow. Marcus looked around the cabin, cataloging supplies and defenses, automatically assessing how long Ghost could hold out if Black Venom found this location. Not long was the answer, maybe hours if he was lucky. You can't stay here. Come with me. Let me get you to people who can protect you and your daughter. Protect me like they protected Rachel. Ghost's laugh was bitter, containing no humor. The cops have it a leak. Someone feeding Black Venom everything the police know. How am I supposed to trust that protection is real? You don't trust the system. You trust me. One person, one set of promises, one guarantee that I'll die before I let Black Venom get to you or Lily. The grandiosity of the statement should have sounded absurd, should have invited mockery or skepticism. Instead, Ghost responded to the absolute certainty in Marcus's voice, recognized something that transcended reasonable assurance, and entered territory of covenant. He sat down on the camping cot that served as his bed, put his head in his hands, seemed to be carrying weight that exceeded physical dimensions. Why would you die for someone you just met? For some screwed-up ex-Black Venom? Nobody who made every wrong choice possible before finally trying to do one right thing. Marcus thought about Davies in Fallujah, about holding that kid while life drained away, about promises made to dying Marines that he'd been powerless to keep. He thought about his sister, about arriving at the crash site too late, about the persistent guilt of surviving when better people hadn't. He thought about Rachel bleeding in an alley, about Tommy's faith that honor mattered, about Iron's expectation that Marcus could lead people toward something resembling redemption. Because I've failed to save too many people. Because I'm tired of adding names to the list of people I let down. Because you've got a daughter who deserves to grow up with a father, and I know what it's like when kids lose their parents too soon. He held Ghost's gaze without flinching. So are you coming, or are you staying here to wait for men who will absolutely kill you when they arrive? Ghost looked around at his temporary sanctuary, seemed to realize how inadequate it was, how temporary safety had always been. He moved to the laptop, began packing it carefully along with external drives and manila envelopes Marcus couldn't read from distance. His movements were methodical, practiced the choreography of someone who'd packed and run before, who knew exactly what mattered enough to carry and what could be left behind. There's one condition, Lily. She lives with her mother, my ex Carmen, in Billings. If I do this, if I cooperate and testify and help put Black Venom away, they'll know about her. They'll use her to get to me. Ghost's voice carried the edge of panic, threatening to break through surface control. I need to know she'll be safe before I hand over anything. We protect her, get her and Carmen into witness protection before any of this becomes public. Brennan can arrange it. He's got federal contacts, can expedite the process. Can you guarantee that? Marcus thought about the question, about the difference between promise and certainty, about how many variables existed between intention and outcome. He couldn't guarantee Ghost's daughter's safety any more than he could guarantee his own survival, or Tommy's, or anyone's. But Ghost needed something more than qualified assurance, needed someone willing to stake absolute claim on uncertain future. I guarantee I'll do everything possible to keep her safe. If Black Venom gets to Lily, it'll be because I'm dead and can't stop them anymore. That good enough? Ghost stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, accepting the terms. Understanding that was the best offer he'd received from Universe, that specialized in breaking promises. He finished packing, shouldered a backpack that contained his evidence and whatever else he'd decided mattered enough to carry. Then looked around the cabin one final time, like he was saying goodbye to something more than just temporary shelter. Okay, let's go. But we stop at Carmen's place first. I need to see Lily, need to make sure she understands what's happening before strangers show up claiming they're protecting her. Agreed. We'll call Brennan from the road, have him arrange protective detail and witness protection paperwork. Then we get you both to a secure location and figure out next steps. They moved toward the door together, Ghost following Marcus's lead, trusting in the way that desperate people trust when options have narrowed to single pathway. Marcus stepped outside, first scanning tree line with combat alertness, looking for signs that Black Venom had found them, that the window for escape had already closed. The clearing appeared empty. The forest was silent except for wind and distant bird calls. Marcus's bike waited where he'd left it, undisturbed chrome reflecting afternoon sun that had broken through morning clouds. He started to relax, started to believe they might actually extract Ghost without complications. That's when the first shot rang out. The bullet hit dirt 3 feet from Marcus's boot, high-powered rifle round that sprayed earth in the unmistakable message that next shot wouldn't miss. Marcus grabbed Ghost, threw them both back toward the cabin, drew his .45 with fluid motion that came from muscle memory, older than conscious thought. How many exits? Just the front, back wall is solid. Ghost's voice had gone high with panic, eyes wide with the terror of knowing his worst fears had materialized. Windows 2, side and back, both small. Marcus processed tactical situation with combat-trained, speed, unknown number of shooters. Limited ammunition cabin that could be surrounded and burned. A Ghost who appeared to be approximately 30 seconds from complete psychological collapse. They'd walked into ambush despite his caution, which meant Black Venom had either followed him from Billings or had found the cabin independently through their own investigation. Another shot, this one hitting the cabin's doorframe, splintering wood 6 inches from Marcus's head. Professional shooting, deliberate near misses designed to pin them down while other elements maneuvered into position. Marcus pulled Ghost away from the door, moved to the side window, risked quick glance outside. 3 men visible in tree-lined tactical positions suggesting military training. 2 more likely on other sides of cabin, classic 5-man assault team. They wore black Venom cuts, moved with coordination that spoke to extensive practice, carried weapons that looked expensive and well-maintained. His phone showed 1 bar of signal fluctuating in and out. He dialed Brennan, praying the connection would hold long enough. Sullivan, what's under fire? Beartooth Mountains, 40 miles northwest of Billings. Jennifer Martinez's cabin. Black Venom, at least 5 shooters, maybe more. Ghost is with me. We're pinned down, need immediate backup. The signal died before Brennan could respond, leaving Marcus staring at no service message, while gunfire continued outside, rounds hitting cabin walls with sound like violent percussion. He turned to Ghost, who'd curled into fetal position against the far wall, hands over his head, breathing in rapid, shallow gasps that suggested panic attack in progress. Ghost, Eddie, look at me. No response. Ghost was gone into whatever internal space terror creates, dissociated from present circumstances, useless for anything requiring coordination or courage. Marcus moved back to the window, assessed angles, calculated odds. They couldn't stay here, Black. Venom would eventually rush the cabin or burn them out. They couldn't run open ground between cabin and tree line, was kill zone. The only option was the one that made least tactical sense but offered psychological advantage: attack. Instead of defend, take initiative instead of reacting force. Black Venom to respond to him rather than executing their plan. He checked his .45 full magazine, +1 in chamber, 15 rounds total. 2 spare magazines in his vest. 45 rounds against at least 5 men with rifles. The mathematics were terrible, but mathematics didn't account for training, didn't account for determination, didn't account for the fact that Marcus had survived worse odds in Iraq through combination of skill and stubborn refusal to surrender. Ghost, I need you to listen. When I go out there, you run. North side of cabin into the trees, don't stop running until you find the road. Flag down any vehicle, tell them to call 911, tell them officer needs assistance. You understand? Ghost's eyes focused, slightly processing words through fog of panic. You can't go out there, they'll kill you. Maybe, but while they're killing me, you're escaping. And that's what matters. You get out, you get the evidence to Brennan, you make sure Rachel didn't almost die for nothing. I can't, I'm not. You're a father, your daughter needs you alive. So when I say run, you run. That's not a request, that's an order from someone who's done this before and knows what he's talking about. Marcus didn't wait for Ghost to argue or agree or process the insanity of what he was about to do. He moved to the door, took 3 deep breaths that centered him the way he'd learned in the Corps, felt time slow down the way it always did. Before combat, felt clarity emerge from chaos like signal breaking through static. He kicked the door open and launched himself outside, firing as he moved 3 rapid shots toward positions where muzzle flash had revealed shooters. Return fire came immediately, of rounds tracking his movement, dirt exploding in patterns that would have killed him if he'd moved 1 second slower or 1 foot different direction. He rolled behind the woodpile that sat 30 feet from cabin, inadequate cover, but better than nothing, kept firing toward tree line while screaming at Ghost, run now. Through peripheral vision, he saw Ghost stumble out of cabin, saw the man freeze for half second. That might cost everything, then saw survival instinct finally override fear, and Ghost took off running north toward trees, carrying the backpack that held evidence worth killing for. Black Venom's attention split, some continuing to fire at Marcus, others tracking Ghost's movement. Marcus made the decision that would either save Ghost or doom them both. He stood from cover, drew all fire to himself, became the target that couldn't be ignored. Bullets found him almost immediately. The first round hit his left side below ribcage impact, spinning him sideways but not dropping him. Pain exploded white-hot but distant, adrenaline providing buffer between injury and incapacitation. He kept firing, kept moving, kept being the threat that demanded response. The second round caught his shoulder, right side nerve damage, making his gun hand weak but not useless. He switched to left hand, awkward but functional Marine training, preparing for exactly this contingency. Ghost reached the tree line, disappeared into forest, still carrying the backpack. Mission accomplished. Whatever happened to Marcus now, Ghost had escaped, would survive to deliver evidence, would live to see his daughter grow up. Marcus's vision was narrowing, blood loss starting to affect cognitive function, legs not responding properly to commands from brain that was starting to shut down non-essential systems. He stumbled backward toward the cabin, not retreating, exactly more like controlled collapse toward anything that might provide cover. The shooting stopped. Marcus blinked, confused brain struggling to process why Black Venom wasn't finishing what they'd started. Then he heard engines, multiple vehicles approaching, fast sirens wailing, the cavalry, arriving in form of Montana State Police, whose response time suggested Brennan had routed them from somewhere much closer than Billings. 3 patrol cars screamed into the clearing, officers emerging with weapons drawn, shouting commands that Marcus couldn't quite parse through the ringing in his ears. Black Venom melted back into force like they'd never been there, tactical retreat in face of law enforcement arrival, choosing escape over completing mission. Marcus sat down heavily back against cabin wall, hand pressed to the wound in his side that was bleeding more than seemed compatible with continued consciousness. His phone rang, Tommy's ringtone, but his hands weren't working properly anymore, fingers refusing to grip the device that kept slipping through blood's slick grasp. An officer appeared in his field of vision, young kid with Montana State Police patch, speaking words that sounded like they were coming through water. Medic. We need a medic, man down, multiple GSWs. Marcus wanted to tell him he was fine, wanted to stand up and walk it off. The way Marines did in Iraq, wanted to maintain the fiction of invulnerability that had carried him through 58 years of accumulating damage. Instead, he just sat there watching his blood darken the dirt, thinking about Ghost, escaping with the evidence, about Rachel recovering in her hospital bed, about Tommy safe at the garage with his protection detail, about Lisa in Seattle, waiting for the phone call that would tell her whether her father was alive or dead. His phone was ringing again. Someone else's hands picked it up, answered it, held it to his ear. Marcus, talk to me. I heard shots. I heard. Tommy's voice, frantic, terrified the kid who'd looked to Marcus as father figure, now facing the reality that father figures could die. I'm okay. Ghost got away. Evidence? Safe. Ambulance is coming. They said 15 minutes. You just have to hold on. Tell Iron. Cancer treatment. Starting next week. Tell him I'm fighting. Don't you dare die on me, Reaper. Don't you fucking dare. I need you. We all need you. The phone slipped from his ear, or maybe someone took it away, or maybe his hearing just stopped working properly. Marcus closed his eyes, felt himself drifting, felt the particular cold that came from blood loss reaching critical thresholds. He should have been scared, should have been thinking about all the things left undone, all the people he'd failed, all the ways his life had fallen short of what it could have been. Instead, he felt peaceful. He'd saved Ghost. He'd protected Lily. He'd given Rachel the evidence she needed. He'd shown Tommy what honor looked like, even when it cost everything. Maybe that was enough. Maybe one good death could balance a lifetime of mistakes. Somewhere far away, someone was shouting about blood pressure, dropping, about pupils dilating, about patient going into shock. But Marcus was already somewhere else, somewhere quieter, somewhere that felt like finally coming home after decades of wandering. The last thing he heard before darkness claimed him completely was a voice, Iron's voice, or maybe his own, or maybe just the universe speaking truth he'd always known but never accepted. Warriors don't get to choose when the fight ends. They just show up, they do what needs doing, and they trust that somebody else will carry on after they fall. Then nothing. Just darkness and silence, and the question of whether Marcus Sullivan had finally run out of luck, or whether the universe had one more impossible resurrection left to give. Consciousness returned in fragments, like a transmission breaking through static voices, first urgent and overlapping, then pain that arrived with the subtlety of a freight train, then the rhythmic pulse of helicopter rotors beating air into submission. Marcus tried to open his eyes, found the effort exceeded his current capabilities, settled for cataloging, sensory input, the way he'd been trained to assess situations when vision wasn't available. He was moving, not on ground, airborne, medevac. The vibration pattern matched Black Hawk helicopters from Iraq, though his rational mind knew this was civilian air ambulance, though, that he was in Montana, not Fallujah, that the voices speaking medical terminology above him were paramedics, not combat medics. BP stabilizing, 80 over 50 up from 70 over 40. 2 units in starting third, both entry wounds packed bleeding controlled. Patient's Marine Corps, according to the trooper. Might be why he's still alive, probably knows how to survive getting shot better than most people know how to survive paper cuts. The last comment would have made Marcus laugh if his body had been capable of coordinating the muscle movements required. Instead, he just drifted floating on morphine and blood loss and the strange dissociation that came from occupying a body that had stopped functioning according to operator specifications. Time became elastic stretching and compressing without pattern. The helicopter landed, he felt the touchdown, felt hands lifting in his gurney, felt movement through space that might have been hospital corridors, or might have been tunnels into afterlife. He couldn't tell and didn't particularly care. Then Rachel's voice cutting through pharmaceutical fog with startling clarity. "That's Marcus Sullivan. He saved my life 2 nights ago. You do not let him die, you understand. Whatever it takes, whatever resources you need, you keep him alive. Someone, Doctor." Mitchell may be responding with professional calm. "We've got him, Sergeant. He's strong. He's got good vitals, considering blood loss, and we're taking him to surgery now. But you need to step back and let us work." Marcus wanted to tell Rachel she should be in bed, recovering, not standing in emergency department issuing commands to trauma surgeons. But his voice wasn't responding to commands from his brain, wasn't producing anything beyond sounds that probably resembled wounded animal more than human speech. Then darkness again, deeper this time, surgical anesthesia, pulling him under with pharmaceutical, certainty that his body interpreted as death and his mind interpreted as mercy. The first thing Marcus became aware of when consciousness returned for real was beeping. Rhythmic electronic, the sound of medical equipment monitoring functions. His body was apparently still capable of performing despite his best efforts to bleed out in a Montana clearing. The second thing was pain. Not the acute agony of fresh bullet wounds, but the deep, persistent ache of tissue healing, of surgical repairs, trying to knit flesh back together. He opened his eyes, found himself in a hospital room that looked identical to the one where Rachel had recovered. Probably same floor, possibly even same wing. Afternoon light filtered through blinds, suggesting he'd lost hours or days to unconsciousness and surgery, and whatever medical interventions had prevented his death. A figure sat in the chair beside his bed, slumped in sleep that looked recent and hard-won. Tommy. The kid's new Hell's Angels patch was visible on his vest, and his face showed exhaustion, mixed with the particular relief that came from vigil ending with patients surviving. Marcus tried to speak, found his throat raw and uncooperative. He made a sound barely qualifying as word, but sufficient to wake Tommy, whose eyes snapped open with the alertness of someone who'd been maintaining watch even while sleeping. "Reaper, Jesus, you're awake." Tommy sat forward, reached for Marcus's hand, then seemed to remember that physical affection between men required careful negotiation. "You've been out for 3 days. Surgery, then medically induced coma, while they made sure there wasn't brain damage from blood loss." Marcus processed that information slowly, brain still operating at reduced capacity. 3 days, 72 hours lost to darkness. He tried to catalog what he remembered: the ambush, Ghost running, getting shot, Tommy's voice on the phone before everything went black. Ghost? Safe. Brennan got him and his daughter into federal witness protection. The evidence he had, it's everything Rachel needed. Documents, recordings, photographs, complete record of Black Venom's distribution network, financial transactions, corruption payments. They've already started making arrests. Relief washed through Marcus, worth more than pain medication. Ghost had survived, had delivered the evidence, had made Marcus's near death mean something beyond just another close call in a life full of them. Viper, Tommy's expression darkened. Still out there, but not for long. There's a federal manhunt, every law enforcement agency in 3 states looking for him. He can't hide forever. Marcus closed his eyes, absorbed that information, understood that unfinished business remained. Viper still breathing meant threat persisted, meant people Marcus cared about remained in danger, meant the war wasn't over, despite its most recent battle concluding with temporary victory. How bad? Marcus gestured weakly at his own body, at the bandages. He could feel restricting movement, at the pain that suggested damage extensive enough to require significant recovery. 2 gunshot wounds. One grazed your ribs, looked worse than it was, mostly soft tissue damage. The other went through your shoulder, shattered your collarbone, required surgery to pin everything back together. Dr. Mitchell says you'll recover full function eventually, but you're looking at months of physical therapy. Tommy's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering news that was simultaneously good and terrible. She also says you're lucky. Another inch either direction on either shot, you'd be dead. Not lucky, trained. Big difference. Tommy laughed, the sound containing relief and residual fear mixed together. Yeah, well, your training scared the shit out of everyone. Iron's been here twice a day checking on you. Rachel's been wheeling herself down from her room to sit with you. Brennan and Cross have been by. Even Hammer showed up, though he just stood in the doorway for 5 minutes looking uncomfortable before leaving. Marcus absorbed that information, understanding that his near death had apparently forced Club to confront the reality that losing him would leave vacuum nobody quite knew how to fill. Iron's letter felt more urgent now, more prophetic, the president dying slowly while trying to prepare Marcus for leadership that seemed inevitable, whether Marcus wanted it or not. Lisa called every day, wanted to fly out, but Rachel convinced her to wait until you were conscious and stable. Tommy pulled out his phone, started typing. I'm texting her now. She's going to want to video call the second she knows you're awake. The prospect filled Marcus with complicated emotions. Gratitude that Lisa cared enough to call, anxiety about confronting their damaged relationship while physically and emotionally vulnerable, of fear that this crisis would be catalyst for reconciliation that felt unearned. But maybe that was the point. Maybe relationships didn't heal through deserving, but through showing up, through being present, even when presence was uncomfortable. Tommy, Marcus waited until the kid met his eyes. You did good. Calling the cops, getting them to the cabin probably saved my life, and ghosts both. I should have been there. Should have gone with you instead of staying at the garage like some kid bench during the important game. You did exactly what I told you to do. You stayed safe. You stayed visible. You called for backup when shit went sideways. That's not being benched. That's being smart. Marcus paused, felt exhaustion pulling at him despite having just woken. Being a brother means trusting that others can handle what you can't. You trusted me to find Ghost. I trusted you to be my safety net. That's how it works. Tommy nodded, seemed to absorb that, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Iron wants to see you, said to let him know the second you're conscious and coherent. Should I call him? Yeah, but give me 10 minutes. Need to. Marcus gestured vaguely at himself, at the hospital gown and IV lines and general state of being that fell short of presentable. Tommy stood, squeezed Marcus's uninjured shoulder with surprising gentleness, then headed toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looked back. I meant what I said on the phone before you passed out. I need you, not just as road captain or mentor or whatever, as family. So don't do anything stupid like dying before we get more time together, okay? The raw honesty of it hit Marcus harder than he expected, bypassing the armor he'd built against emotional vulnerability. I'll try. Tommy left, and Marcus was alone with beeping machines, and afternoon sunlight, and the accumulated weight of 58 years spent running from connection. Because connection meant loss, and loss meant grief, and grief meant confronting the reality that he'd loved people and failed them and survived when better people hadn't. His phone sat on the bedside table, charging, cable-connected screen showing 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. He picked it up carefully, shoulder screaming protest at the movement, scrolled through notifications that documented 3 days of people caring about him in ways he'd spent decades convincing himself weren't real. Lisa's messages formed a progression: concern, to panic, to anger, to resignation, to hope. The most recent, from 6 hours ago. Dad, they say you're stable but still unconscious. I'm flying out tomorrow, no matter what anyone tells me. We need to talk. And you need to stop getting shot. Love you. Marcus stared at those last 2 words, love you, typed casually, like they were obvious, like they didn't carry weight of decades of distance and disappointment. He typed back with shaking hand, I'm awake, I'm okay, and I'd like that talk when you get here. He sent it before doubt could intervene, then set the phone down and closed his eyes, not sleeping, just existing in the quiet moment before complications returned and choices demanded making. 10 minutes later, Iron arrived. The club president looked worse than when Marcus had last seen him 3 days ago, grayer, thinner, moving with the careful economy of someone whose body was actively betraying him. Lung cancer eating him from inside while he maintained facade of strength for members who needed him to be permanent fixture rather than temporary leader, counting down toward inevitable end. Iron pulled the chair closer to the bed, sat with audible relief, fixed Marcus with gaze that had evaluated countless men over 4 decades and learned to read truth beneath whatever surface they presented. You look like shit. You should see the other guys. I did. Montana State Police arrested 3 of them fleeing the scene. 2 more were picked up trying to cross into Canada. All 5 are talking, trying to cut deals, giving up information about Black Venom's operations. Iron leaned back, seemed to be deciding how much to share. Your little stunt protecting Ghost broke this wide open. Federal prosecutors are building RICO case that's going to dismantle Black Venom completely. Viper's organization is collapsing, and he knows it. Makes him more dangerous. Desperate men do desperate things. He's still out there. Not for long. Every cop in 3 states is looking for him, and his own people are turning on him, trying to save themselves. He's got nowhere to run, nobody to hide with, and nothing to lose. Classic definition of dangerous animal backed into corner. Iron paused, which is why we need to talk about what happens next. Marcus waited, understanding that whatever came next would be significant, that Iron didn't make hospital visits for casual updates. I'm dying, you know it, I know it, but the club doesn't need to know it yet. I've got maybe 3 months if I'm lucky, maybe 6 weeks if the cancer decides to be aggressive about finishing what it started. Iron's voice carried no self-pity, no fear, just matter-of-fact assessment of reality. Which means we need to handle succession before I'm too weak to manage the transition. Hammer. Hammer would tear this club apart within 6 months. He's too rigid, too stuck in old ways, too unwilling to adapt to reality that Hell's Angels can't survive by pretending it's still 1970. We need someone who understands honor without being imprisoned by it, someone who can lead us toward legitimacy without losing what makes us brothers. Iron held Marcus's gaze. I told you in that letter you're the only member capable of this, and recent events proved it. You worked with cops to catch criminals. You saved lives on both sides of the law. You showed the club that strength and honor aren't incompatible with evolution. I'm 58 years old, I've got cancer, I just got shot twice, and I can barely maintain relationship with my own daughter. What makes you think I can lead 28 men toward anything except mutual destruction? Because you've already been doing it. Tommy looks to you for guidance. Preacher respects your judgment. Even Hammer, though he'd never admit it, recognizes your authority when you speak. You lead through action rather than position, which is the only kind of leadership that matters. Iron coughed, wet and rattling reminder of mortality residing in his lungs. I'm calling vote for next week. You'll be out of hospital by then, strong enough to stand in front of the club. I nominate you for president. You accept, and we transition power before my death makes it emergency rather than planned succession. The weight of it settled over Marcus like a physical burden, responsibility for 28 lives, for club's future, for maintaining tradition while enabling evolution. He thought about all the reasons he was wrong, choice, all the ways he'd failed at leadership in his past, all the damage he carried that seemed incompatible with guiding others toward better futures. Then he thought about Tommy, about the kid needing someone to show him that honor mattered, about Iron dying slowly while trying to preserve something worth preserving, about Rachel, about Ghost, about all the people who trusted him with their lives and their hopes despite having every reason not to. If I do this, if I accept nomination, things change. We work with law enforcement on shared threats. We maintain legitimacy, pay taxes, follow laws that don't violate core principles. We become what you described, brothers, who ride together, not criminals hiding behind motorcycles. I know. That's why I'm asking you instead of Hammer. And if members don't accept the changes, if Hammer and his faction decide new direction isn't what they signed up for, then they leave, and good riddance. The club survives by adapting or dies by refusing. I'd rather lead smaller group committed to honor than larger group committed to self-destruction. Iron stood, moved toward the door, then turned back. Read the letter again. The one I gave you at the clubhouse. I wrote more than you probably remember, including the part about your cancer. How's that going, by the way? Starting treatment next week. Oncologist says odds are good if I commit to fighting. Good, because I need you alive for at least a few more years, long enough to stabilize succession, long enough to see this club transform into something sustainable. Iron smiled, rare expression that softened his weathered features. And selfishly, I want to die knowing I left this family in good hands. So do me that favor, Reaper. Survive your cancer, survive, Viper, survive, whatever else this universe throws at you. Because if you die before finishing what we started, I'm going to be very disappointed. And dead me might be even scarier than living me. He left, closing the door softly, leaving Marcus alone with decision that felt simultaneously inevitable and impossible. President of Hell's Angels Lodge chapter. Leader of men who'd spent decades defining themselves in opposition to the society Marcus was proposing they engage with. Custodian of tradition he'd have to reshape without destroying. His phone buzzed, Lisa video call request. Marcus stared at it for 3 seconds, then accepted his daughter's face materializing on screen with a particular clarity that made distance feel negotiable. Dad, oh God, you look terrible. You should see the other guys. That's what I'm worried about. Lisa's voice carried a mix of relief and exasperation that seemed uniquely suited to parent-child relationships that had survived despite years of mutual disappointment. I'm at SeaTac boarding in 40 minutes. I'll be in Billings by 6 Lodge by 8. Someone named Tommy said he'd pick me up. You don't have to come. I'm fine. I'm recovering. There's no crisis that requires, Dad, stop. I'm coming because I want to, not because I have to. Because we're family and family shows up even when, especially when things are complicated and uncomfortable, and nobody knows quite what to say. Lisa paused, seemed to be gathering courage for something. And because I'm tired of pretending we don't matter to each other. You almost died again, and I realized I'm running out of time to fix what's broken between us. So I'm coming and we're talking and you're going to let me be your daughter instead of just persons you feel guilty about disappointing. The directness of it, the refusal to let him hide behind excuses or deflection, reminded Marcus why Lisa had succeeded in building life he'd failed to build. She faced problems directly instead of riding away from them, hoping distance would make them irrelevant. Okay, I'd like that. Good. And Dad, I love you. I know we haven't said that much recently. I know things have been weird for basically my entire adult life, but it's true. So stop getting shot, stop making choices that might kill you, and let's figure out how to be family again. The call ended before Marcus could respond, leaving him staring at blank screen and feeling something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Not the desperate kind born from denial, but the cautious variety that acknowledged damage while believing repair was possible. Marcus stood in the clubhouse meeting room for the first time since his surgery, left arm in sling, supporting his pinned collarbone ribs taped beneath his shirt, where the graze wound was still healing, exhaustion visible in every line of his body, but determination overriding physical limitation. 28 members assembled before him, some supportive, some skeptical, all waiting to hear why Iron had called emergency meeting during what should have been Marcus's recovery period. Lisa sat in the back corner, not member, not prospect, not anything that club. Rules traditionally allowed in meeting room, but Iron had made exception because she was Marcus's daughter. And because he understood that some moments required witnesses from outside the brotherhood to make them real. Tommy stood beside Marcus, the kid's new patch catching light, his presence representing something important about succession and mentorship, and the way knowledge passed from generation to generation through demonstration rather than instruction. Iron rapped the gavel 3 times, establishing order, then stood with visible effort that suggested this might be among his final acts as president. When he spoke, his voice carried authority that transcended physical decline, the weight of 4 decades spent building and maintaining and protecting family that existed beyond blood. Brothers, I've called you here because it's time to discuss the club's future. My future specifically. He paused, let silence build. I have stage 4 lung cancer. 6 months maximum, probably less, which means we need to handle presidential succession before it becomes emergency rather than planned transition. The announcement landed like concussion shock waves radiating through room as members processed information most had suspected but none had confirmed. Hammer started to stand, presumably to make case for his own candidacy, but Iron silenced him with gesture that brooked no interruption. I'm nominating Marcus Sullivan for president. He's demonstrated leadership through action, has earned respect across the club, and represents the kind of evolution we need to survive next decade. He's worked with law enforcement to destroy black venom. He's mentored new members like Tommy, and he's shown that honor and adaptation aren't mutually exclusive. Hammer erupted. This is insane. Sullivan violated club code by helping cops, by making us vulnerable to investigations, by saving one of our own from being framed for murder. Iron's voice cut through protest with surgical precision. Black Venom was planning to kill that cop and leave evidence pointing to Hell's Angels. Marcus's intervention prevented war with law enforcement that would have destroyed this chapter. That's not violation, that's strategic thinking that kept us alive. The room fractured into arguments, multiple conversations happening simultaneously, old tensions surfacing with renewed vigor. Marcus stood silent, letting it play out, understanding that accepting nomination meant accepting whatever came next, support or opposition unity, or fracture success, or catastrophic failure. Finally, Preacher stood, the old member's voice, carrying weight that forced attention. I've known Marcus since he prospected. I've watched him make hard calls, handle dangerous situations, and maintain honor even when it cost him personally. Iron's right, Marcus represents evolution without abandonment of principles. I support his nomination. Other voices joined support, from some opposition from others. The democratic chaos that defined club decision-making. When vote was finally called, results came clear. 18 in favor, 10 opposed, 0 abstentions. Not unanimous, but decisive majority. Iron handed Marcus the gavel with ceremony that transcended simple object transfer. This club is yours now, President Sullivan. Lead it well, lead it forward, and don't fuck it up so badly that I regret dying and leaving you in charge. The room erupted in laughter that dissolved remaining tension, and then members were crowding forward to shake Marcus's hand, to offer congratulations or concerns, to begin negotiating what this transition meant for their individual relationships with power and authority. Tommy was first, his grip firm despite visible emotion. Congratulations, Prez. You're going to be great at this. You're biased. Doesn't make me wrong. Hammer approached last, his expression containing grudging acceptance mixed with residual hostility. I still think you're a wrong choice, but the club voted, and I respect democracy even when it elects people I disagree with. So I'll support you as president, even though I reserve right to argue when you make decisions I think are stupid. Fair enough. And Derek, Marcus waited until Hammer met his eyes. I'm going to need your experience and your institutional knowledge. You don't have to like me, but I hope we can work together for the club's benefit. Hammer studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. We'll see. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it wasn't open warfare either. Marcus would take it. 3 days after Marcus's installation as president, Viper made his final mistake. He tried to get to Tommy. The kid was leaving the garage after evening shifts, surrounded by the protection detail Brennan had maintained despite Black Venom's apparent collapse, when a black SUV pulled alongside him. Window rolled down, Viper visible in driver's seat, scar on his face catching streetlight, weapon visible in his hand. Get in the vehicle, kid. We're going to have conversation about your mentor. Tommy froze, caught between instinct to run and understanding that running might get him shot. The protection detail, 2 unmarked police vehicles, had been caught flat-footed, blocked by traffic too far away to intervene before situation escalated. But Tommy had been raised on streets, had survived years before Hell's Angels by being smart rather than brave. He didn't get in the vehicle. Instead, he did something Viper didn't expect. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Vincent Castellano called Viper VP of Black Venom MC. You're threatening me at gunpoint on public street on video with witnesses. You want to talk about Reaper? Call him yourself, otherwise you're just proving you're a desperate coward who targets kids because you can't face men who would actually fight back. The recording, the witnesses, the police closing in, all of it meant Viper's window for successful kidnapping had closed. He could shoot Tommy and accomplish nothing except confirming his guilt, or he could drive away and try again later with better planning. He chose option 3, desperation. Viper accelerated SUV jumping curb, aiming directly at Tommy with apparent intention to run him down if he couldn't take him alive. Tommy dove aside, protection detail finally in position, opened fire rounds, punching through windshield and door panels with precision that suggested extensive training. The SUV swerved, hit parked car. Viper tumbled out with weapon raised, wounded, but still dangerous. Two officers went down from his return fire before more police arrived, for overwhelming force made continued resistance impossible before Viper finally dropped his weapon and collapsed against the vehicle he'd turned into a failed escape attempt. The whole encounter lasted 90 seconds. Tommy survived with bruises from his dive onto pavement. Two officers sustained injuries but would recover. And Viper Vincent Castellano, the man who had spent 15 years planning a revenge against Marcus Sullivan, was arrested, charged with attempted murder, attempted kidnapping, assault on police officers, and eventually through evidence Ghost had provided racketeering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy to murder Rachel Vance. Marcus visited him once in county jail 3 weeks after the arrest. Not to gloat, not to threaten, but to close loop that had been open since Cobra's death 15 years prior. They sat across a metal table in visiting room, separated by plexiglass, speaking through phones that transmitted voice while maintaining physical barrier. Viper looked diminished without his leather cut, without his authority, without the power that came from leading organization that no longer existed. Black Venom MC had collapsed completely. Members arrested or scattered, legacy reduced to cautionary tale about what happened when criminal enterprise attracted enough law enforcement attention. You won. Viper's voice carried exhaustion rather than anger. Congratulations. Nobody won. Your brother's dead. Rachel almost died. Ghost lost his ability to live openly. I got shot twice and you're facing 30 years minimum. That's not victory, that's just damage on all sides. Then what was the point? Why did any of this happen? Marcus thought about that question, about the chain of consequences that started with Cobra beating a woman and ended here in county jail with two men staring at each other across divide that ideology and circumstances had created. The point was making choice between what's easy and what's right. Your brother was killing that woman. I stopped him. That's where everything started, with choice to intervene instead of walk away. Every decision after that, every consequence, every pain, all of it traces back to that moment when I chose action over convenience. And you think that makes you noble? That choosing to play hero justifies killing my brother? No, killing Cobra was tragedy, but it was necessary tragedy. And I've spent 15 years accepting that necessity doesn't make something less painful, just makes it unavoidable. Marcus leaned forward, making sure Viper could see his expression, could read sincerity in his face. I'm sorry about Cobra, genuinely. He was your family, and losing family carves holes that never fully heal. But I'd make the same choice again if I was back in that parking lot, because letting him kill that woman would have been worse than the pain his death caused. Viper stared at him for a long moment, then something shifted in his expression. Not forgiveness exactly, more like acceptance. That revenge hadn't healed anything, that 15 years of rage had accomplished nothing except spreading damage to more people. I hope it was worth it. All this while, he gestured at the jail, at his circumstances, at the wreckage of his life. For your principles. Me too. Marcus left without saying more, understanding that some conversations didn't have resolutions, some conflicts didn't have winners, some wounds stayed open no matter how much time passed. But at least the active violence had ended. At least no one else would die because two men couldn't figure out how to grieve without seeking vengeance. The leak was exposed through Ghost's evidence recordings of phone calls between Morris and Black Venom's logistics coordinator, emails discussing police operations and how to avoid them, bank records showing payments totaling $180,000 over 18 months. Morris had convinced himself he was reducing harm, controlling distribution, making tragedy like his son's death less likely. Instead, he'd enabled expansion of network that killed more people than the uncontrolled chaos he'd been trying to prevent. He was arrested at his sister's house in Spokane, where he'd fled after Rachel's attack, where he'd been hiding while his world collapsed. In his confession, Morris explained the progression: first contact from Black Venom, offering condolences about his son's suggestions that if distribution was controlled by people who cared about purity and dosage, fewer kids would die from contaminated product. Then small favors, information that seemed harmless. Then payments leveraged fear that stopping would expose everything he'd already done. By the end, Morris was trapped, couldn't stop helping without incriminating himself, couldn't continue without accumulating guilt that made sleep impossible, and eating difficult, and looking his wife in the eye nearly unbearable. His trial lasted 3 weeks. He pled guilty, cooperated with federal prosecutors, testified against every Black Venom member still alive, and capable of being prosecuted. In exchange for cooperation, he received 12 years instead of 25, with possibility of parole after 8. On the day of sentencing, Marcus attended not to gloat, not to judge, but because Morris's story felt like cautionary tale about what happened when good intentions met systemic problems without adequate support structures. The captain had tried to fix broken system through individual action, had failed, had been consumed by the forces he thought he could control. Marcus understood that impulse, had spent decades making similar calculations about how one person could matter in context of overwhelming complexity. The difference was, Marcus had eventually accepted limitations, had learned to work within systems rather than trying to subvert them. After sentencing, Marcus spoke briefly with Morris's wife, Patricia, who'd attended every day of the trial despite humiliation and betrayal her husband's actions represented. "I'm sorry for what he did to Sergeant Vance, for the role he played in all this damage." Patricia studied him with expression that contained grief and confusion and anger, without clear target for any of those emotions. "Did you know my son, Stephen?" "No. He was beautiful, funny, smart, kind, everything parent hopes for. And he got hooked on pills after football injury, escalated to heroin because it was cheaper, died in a gas station bathroom with needle in his arm, and nobody around who cared enough to call ambulance." Her voice remained steady despite tears tracking down her face. "Bob thought he could prevent that from happening to other kids. Thought if he could control the supply, make it safe if fewer parents would lose children the way we lost Stephen. Instead, he just made it easier for dealers to operate, made it possible for more kids to die. The road to hell, right, paved with good intentions. I'm sorry about Stephen, and I'm sorry about Bob. Both losses different ways." Patricia nodded, wiped her eyes, then walked away to begin rebuilding life that had been shattered by choices made with love, but executed with catastrophic misjudgment. 6 months passed. Marcus completed surgery, radiation, hormone therapy for his prostate cancer. Dr. Keller pronounced him in remission, though cautioned that remission meant vigilant monitoring rather than guaranteed cure. The collarbone healed with physical therapy that was precisely as miserable as predicted range of motion, returning gradually through exercises that felt like medieval torture adapted for modern medical practice. Rachel returned to full duty, promoted to captain in ceremony that recognized her courage and her near sacrifice in pursuit of justice. She maintained friendship with Marcus that confused observers who couldn't reconcile cop and Hell's Angel having coffee weekly, discussing everything from PTSD to parenting to whether true redemption was possible or just comfortable fiction people told themselves. Her daughter Maggie started volunteering at veterans organizations after meeting Marcus, something about the grizzled biker who'd saved her mother, inspiring her to connect with people who'd served. Rachel wasn't sure whether to be grateful or worried, settled for both. Tommy thrived. The kid, no longer kid really, but man, emerging from boyhood through trial by fire, took on increasing responsibility. Within club mentored new prospects, demonstrated leadership that suggested he'd someday follow Marcus's path toward presidency. His protection detail was eventually lifted when Black Venom's complete collapse made continued surveillance unnecessary, but he remained cautious, aware that danger could come from unexpected directions. Ghost and his daughter Lily entered witness protection, relocated somewhere federal marshals wouldn't disclose, even to people who'd saved Ghost's life. But 3 months after his disappearance, Marcus received postcard with no return address, no signature, just message. "She started 3rd grade, she's doing great. Thank you." Marcus kept it on his mantle beside his sister's photograph reminder that sometimes the people you saved stayed saved. Iron died on a Tuesday in September, lungs finally surrendering after months of fighting. He went peacefully surrounded by club members who'd been his family for 40 years. His last words to Marcus, simple, "Don't fuck it up." The funeral drew 300 people, Hell's Angels from 6 state, civilians from Lodge, who remembered when Iron had helped rebuild the community center after fire, even a few police officers who'd learned to respect the man despite disagreeing with his choices. Marcus delivered eulogy that managed to honor Iron's complexity without sanitizing his history, to celebrate his life without pretending it had been conventional. Hammer attended, stood in back left without speaking. But 2 weeks later, he approached Marcus with olive branch. "I disagreed with Iron about you, but he was rarely wrong about people. So I'm willing to see how your presidency unfolds. before deciding whether to stay or leave. It was, Marcus reflected, probably the kindest thing Hammer had ever said to him. His daughter visited 5 times over those 6 months, their relationship rebuilding through incremental honesty that felt uncomfortable but necessary. They talked about divorce, about his absence during her childhood, about the ways military service had damaged him in ways neither of them had understood at the time. Lisa didn't offer forgiveness, Ezekieli, but she offered something potentially more valuable: willingness to continue engaging, despite disappointment, willingness to build forward a relationship that acknowledged past without being imprisoned by it. On her 5th visit, she brought someone brand her fiancé, software engineer from Seattle, who looked terrified meeting his future father-in-law, who happened to be president of Hell's Angels chapter. Marcus found the man's terror oddly endearing, appreciated the courage it took to show up despite reasonable fear. "Dad, this is James. James, this is my father." They shook hands, James's grip uncertain, Marcus's careful not to intimidate through excessive strength. They talked for 30 minutes about nothing important, yet Seattle traffic. James's work designing interfaces for medical software. Then Lisa pulled Marcus aside, left, James anxiously examining the clubhouse's collection of vintage motorcycles under Tommy's supervision. "I want you to walk me down the aisle at the wedding, June next year, assuming you're healthy enough to travel." The request hung between them, weighted with implications about reconciliation and forgiveness, and whether people could truly change or just got better at managing damage they couldn't repair. "You sure having Hell's Angels president at wedding might create complications with James's family?" "His family can deal. You're my father. And despite everything, despite years of distance, despite all the ways we've failed each other, I want you there. I want you to be part of my life going forward. Not just ghost I occasionally call out of guilt." Marcus felt something break and heal simultaneously in his chest, years of careful emotional control cracking to reveal the hope he'd buried beneath cynicism and self-protection. "I'd be honored." Lisa hugged him then, first time in years physical contact that reminded Marcus what family felt like when you stopped running from it. Marcus stood in the clubhouse's main room looking at the photographs that lined the walls, decades of brotherhood captured in black and white color, gradually replacing monochrome as years advanced. Iron's photo now hung in center position, memorial to President, who transformed loose association of riders into family that endured. Tommy entered carrying coffee from the diner across the street, handed one to Marcus with easy familiarity that came from months of working side by side. "Morris hearing is today. Parole board reviewing his case after 3 years served." "I know, Rachel's testifying." "For or against?" "For, ma'am." "Says he's done his time, shown genuine remorse, been model prisoner. Says keeping him locked up doesn't serve justice, just serves vengeance." Tommy nodded, processed that through his evolving understanding of how justice worked when principles met pragmatism. "You going, Bato?" "No, that's Rachel's call to make, not mine." Morris hurt her most directly. She gets to decide whether his debt is paid. They stood in comfortable silence, watching through window as Lodge went about its morning business. The town had changed subtly over past months, more cooperation between police and Hell's Angels, fewer incidents of mutual suspicion escalating into confrontation, gradual recognition that shared enemies sometimes created shared purpose. Viper's trial starts next month. Federal prosecution for the RICO charges. Ghost is flying back from wherever he's been hidden to testify. "I know. You planning to attend?" Marcus thought about that question, about whether watching Viper's conviction would provide closure or just remind him that some conflicts didn't end cleanly, some wounds stayed open regardless of legal resolutions. "Maybe, haven't decided yet." His phone buzzed. Brennan message brief, "Coffee tomorrow. Want to discuss partnership opportunities between P and your club for community outreach. Rachel says you're reasonable. Prove her right." Marcus smiled, typed back, confirmation. 6 months ago, the idea of Hell's Angels doing community outreach with police department would have been absurd. Now it felt like logical extension of evolution. Iron had started and Marcus was continuing. "You know what Iron told me right before he died?" Tommy's voice carried the particular quality of someone sharing confidence that mattered. "He said the best thing he ever did was making you president. Said you'd lead us somewhere he couldn't have taken us, somewhere between what we were and what we needed to become. He said that, yeah, said you were bridge between past and future, between tradition and adaptation. Said if anyone could keep this club alive into the next generation, it was you. Marcus absorbed that, felt the weight of Iron's faith mixing with his own persistent doubt about whether he deserved the trust people kept placing in him. But maybe that was the point. Maybe leadership wasn't about deserving, wasn't about being qualified or prepared or confident. Maybe it was just about showing up, making best available choice, and trusting that people around you would compensate for your inadequacies the way you compensated for theirs. You ready for church tonight? First vote on new prospects since I became president. Ready. Hammer's actually being reasonable about candidates for once. Said something about trusting your judgment even when he disagrees with your methods. Miracles do happen. They finished their coffee, returned to the administrative work that came with running organization that existed in complicated space between legitimate club and outlaw legacy. Marcus signed checks, reviewed maintenance schedules for the clubhouse, answered emails from other chapters asking about his approach to police cooperation. At some point, without noticing the transition, he'd stopped thinking about dying and started thinking about building. Stopped running from connection and started running toward it. Stopped defining himself by what he'd lost and started defining himself by what he could still protect. His cancer might return. Viper's conviction might not survive appeal. Hammer might eventually leave and take portion of the club with him. Lisa's wedding might surface more family damage than it healed. Tommy might discover that Marcus was terrible mentor, leading him toward compromised version of brotherhood. All of that was possible. All of it could happen. But Marcus Sullivan, 58 years old, Hells Angels president, cancer survivor, former Marine, who'd learned too late that survival wasn't the same as living, he'd show up anyway. He'd make the best choices available given imperfect information. He'd trust that honor mattered even when outcomes were uncertain. And if that wasn't enough, if he failed, despite best efforts, at least he'd fail while trying to build something rather than running from everything. His phone buzzed again, Lisa photo message showing her in wedding dress during fitting caption, reading June 15th. You better be there, old man. Marcus smiled, typed back, wouldn't miss it for anything. Outside, the Montana sun climbed higher. Lodge continued its morning routines, and somewhere in federal custody, ghost evidence was being compiled into prosecution that would end Black Venom forever. Somewhere in county jail, Viper waited for trial that would determine whether he spent decades in prison or life. Somewhere in Seattle, Lisa was planning wedding that would include father who'd spent most of her life being absent. And in the Hells Angels clubhouse, Marcus Sullivan stood surrounded by photographs of men who'd become family despite having no blood connection, who'd chosen loyalty over convenience, who'd shown him that redemption wasn't destination you reached, but direction you traveled. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It wasn't the story anyone would have predicted, but it was his. And for the first time in decades, that felt like enough. Marcus Reaper Sullivan served as president of the Hells Angels Lodge chapter for 12 years. Under his leadership, violent crime in Lodge decreased by 40%, and the chapter established unprecedented cooperation with local law enforcement while maintaining its independence and brotherhood traditions. He walked his daughter Lisa down the aisle in June. They continued building their relationship slowly, with honesty replacing resentment. His cancer remained in remission for 7 years before returning. He died at age 71, surrounded by his club brothers, his daughter, and Rachel Vance, who'd remained his friend until the end. Rachel Vance became chief of police of Lodge at age 49. She implemented community policing programs that bridged gaps between law, enforcement, and marginalized groups, including motorcycle clubs. She retired after 25 years of service. Tommy Chen became president of Lodge chapter after Marcus's death, continuing the tradition of honor-driven leadership. He established scholarship fund for children of incarcerated parents named after Sarah Sullivan. Vincent Viper Castellano received 35 years in federal prison. He died of medical complications after serving 8 years. Edward Ghost Martinez and his daughter Lily remain in witness protection. On what would have been Marcus's 72nd birthday, an anonymous donation of $50,000 was made to veterans organizations in Lodge, Montana. The Hells Angels Lodge chapter still rides every Sunday, weather permitting, maintaining tradition while honoring the man who taught them that strength and honor can coexist with compassion.